I arrived home from my trip 48 hours early and I did not tell a soul. I walked through the front door expecting the warm smell of my wife's peach cobbler, but instead I found her in the dark living room crying all alone. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the sound coming from the kitchen. My son was in there laughing loudly with his in-laws. They were drinking my wine, they were planning my funeral, and they had absolutely no idea that the man they were burying was standing right behind the wall, listening to every single word. I am Ray Bishop. I am 72 years old. And today is the day I teach my son that you never celebrate a man's death before you check his pulse. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family members who mistook your kindness for weakness. The drive home from the clinic had been long and silent. For 3 days I had been sitting in a sterile white room in Cleveland, waiting for a biopsy result that could have changed everything. The doctors suspected pancreatic cancer. They told me to prepare my affairs. They told me to say my goodbyes. So I went alone. I did not want to worry Viola. I did not want to burden my son Marcus. I wanted to carry that weight by myself, just like I have carried every beam and brick of my construction company for the last 40 years. But God had other plans. The results came back negative. It was just a benign cyst. I was healthy. I was strong. I was going to live another 20 years. I drove back to Atlanta with a song in my heart. I imagined the look on Viola's face when I walked in the door. I imagined hugging her and telling her that she was stuck with me for a long time yet. I pulled my truck into the driveway and killed the engine. It was strange. The house was dark. Not the cozy kind of dark where you watch a movie, but the cold kind of dark that feels abandoned. My son's car was in the driveway. So was a silver Mercedes that belonged to Harold and Linda Preston, my sons-in-laws. I unlocked the front door quietly. My years as a contractor taught me how to walk on floorboards without making them creak. I stepped into the foyer and the air felt heavy. It smelled of expensive perfume and betrayal. I looked to my left into the formal living room. The curtains were drawn tight. The only light came from the street lamps outside filtering through the sheer drapes. And there she was. Viola was sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa curled into a ball. My wife is a strong woman. She raised a child while I was out pouring concrete 12 hours a day. She managed our books when we had nothing but debt. But tonight she looked small. She looked broken. Her shoulders were shaking and I could hear the soft, stifled sobs that she was trying to keep inside. In her hand, she was clutching a piece of paper so tight that her knuckles were gray. I took a step toward her, ready to rush to her side, ready to ask her who had hurt her. But then I heard it. A loud booming laugh coming from the kitchen. It was Marcus, my son, the boy I had put through private school, the man whose MBA I had paid for in cash. He was laughing, and he was not alone. I froze. The contrast between the woman crying in the dark and the party happening in the kitchen made my blood run cold. I signaled Viola to stay quiet. She looked up at me and her eyes were red and swollen. She opened her mouth to speak, but I put a finger to my lips. I needed to know. I needed to understand why my wife was shattering while my son was celebrating. I crept down the hallway toward the kitchen. The double doors were slightly ajar. I stood in the shadows just out of sight. I became a ghost in my own home. The kitchen was blazing with light. Standing around my granite island were Harold and Linda Preston. Harold was a man who made his money in used car dealerships and thought that gave him the right to look down on a man who worked with his hands. He was wearing a pastel polo shirt that was too tight for his stomach. Linda was holding a crystal wine glass, inspecting the liquid inside against the light. And there was Courtney, my daughter-in-law, leaning against the counter looking at my son with a predatory smile. Then I heard a sound that hit me harder than any physical blow could have. Pop. It was the sound of a cork being pulled from a bottle, not just any bottle. I peeked through the crack in the door. Marcus was holding the 1982 Bordeaux. The bottle I had bought at auction 20 years ago. The bottle I had told everyone was strictly off limits because I was saving it for my 40th wedding anniversary with Viola, which was only 2 months away. Marcus poured the wine into Harold's glass. The dark red liquid swirled and settled. Harold took a sip and smacked his lips loudly. "Not bad for a man who spent half his life digging ditches," Harold said with a sneer. He gestured around my kitchen, waving his hand as if he already owned the place. "You know, Marcus, you really need to modernize this place once he is gone. It smells like old people and hard work." My grip tightened on the doorframe. I wanted to burst in there and shatter that glass against the wall. I wanted to grab Harold by his collar and throw him out onto the street. But I stopped myself. I am Ray Bishop. I do not act on impulse. I act on information. I needed to hear the rest. Linda chimed in, running her finger along the granite countertop. Oh, do not worry, Harold. Courtney has already contacted an architect. Once we get rid of that tacky furniture in the living room and knock down that wall, we can open this space up. It will be perfect for our summer parties. My heart hammered against my ribs. They were talking about my house as if I were already a memory, as if I were a ghost haunting the halls. But I was not dead. I was standing 10 feet away. Marcus took a large gulp of the wine. He did not even savor it. He drank it like it was cheap soda. He looked nervous, but he was trying to impress them. He was trying to be the big man. Look, I know Mom is upset, Marcus said, his voice wavering slightly. She kept crying when I made her sign the papers, but it had to be done. The doctor said Dad might not make it through the week. Pancreatic cancer is aggressive. When he goes, Mom is going to be a mess. She will not be able to handle a property this size. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. So that was it. I had told Marcus I was going for a checkup, just a routine checkup. But somehow he had jumped to the conclusion that I was dying. Or maybe he just hoped I was dying. And instead of waiting for the results, instead of praying for his father, he had used my absence to strike. Harold laughed again, a deep, guttural sound that grated on my nerves. You did the right thing, son. Women get emotional. Men do business. Getting her to sign that power of attorney was a stroke of genius. Now we control the assets. We control the bank accounts. And most importantly, we control the land. I looked back at the living room where Viola was sitting, the piece of paper in her hand. It was not a letter. It was a power of attorney. They had cornered her. They had terrified her with lies about my health. They probably told her I was in a coma or on life support just to get her to sign away our life's work. Courtney walked over to Marcus and kissed him on the cheek, but her eyes were cold. You are finally stepping up, baby. Your dad held on to this empire for too long. He is old school. He is stubborn. He would have never sold this land. But with him out of the picture, we can finally move forward. And then came the sentence that changed me forever. The sentence that killed Ray Bishop, the father, and gave birth to Ray Bishop, the avenger. Harold raised his glass for a toast. To Ray Bishop, may he pass quickly and painlessly. Because frankly, I am tired of waiting. Once the old man kicks the bucket, we are going to bulldoze this house and turn this lot into the back nine of the country club. This land is worth $5 million bare. With that ugly house on it, it is worthless. Marcus clinked his glass against Harold's. To the future, he said. They drank. They laughed. They celebrated my death while drinking my anniversary wine in the house I built with my own 2 hands. I stood there in the hallway and something inside me snapped. It was not a loud snap. It was quiet. It was the sound of a steel beam settling into place. The sadness evaporated. The shock vanished. All that was left was a cold, hard clarity. I looked down at my hands. These hands had mixed mortar. These hands had framed roofs in the blistering heat. These hands had signed the checks that paid for Marcus's first car, his college tuition, and his wedding. These hands had held him when he was a baby and promised to protect him from the world. But I realized in that moment that I had failed. I had protected him too much. I had sheltered him from the struggle so he never learned the value of loyalty. I had raised a wolf and invited him into my sheepfold. I turned around and walked back to the living room. My steps were heavy and deliberate now. Viola looked up at me terrified. She saw the change in my face. She saw that the gentle husband who had left 3 days ago had not returned. A different man had come back. Ray, she whispered, her voice trembling. They told me you were... They said the doctors called. Shh, I said gently, kneeling down in front of her. I took the crumpled paper from her hand. I smoothed it out on the coffee table. It was a durable power of attorney, granting Marcus full control over our estate, effective immediately upon my incapacitation. Is it true? Viola asked, tears streaming down her face. Are you dying, Ray? I looked deep into her eyes. I took her hand and kissed it. My lips were warm, but my eyes were ice. No, Viola. I said, my voice low and steady. I am not dying. The doctors gave me a clean bill of health. I am going to live for a very long time. Viola gasped, a mixture of relief and confusion washing over her face. But But Marcus lied. I cut in. They all lied. They wanted the house, Viola. They wanted the money. And they thought I was the only thing standing in their way. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I brushed the dust off my sleeve. I looked at the reflection in the mirror hanging in the hallway. I saw a 72-year-old man with gray hair and wrinkled skin. But beneath that, I saw the street fighter from Chicago who had clawed his way up from nothing. "Stay here," I told Viola. "Dry your eyes. Do not shed another tear for them. They are not worth the water." "Where are you going?" she asked, gripping my arm. "I am going to the kitchen," I said calmly. "I am going to have a drink with our son." I turned and walked toward the light. The laughter in the kitchen was still going strong. They were comfortable. They felt safe. They thought the king was dead and they were dividing the spoils. I reached the double doors again. This time I did not hide in the shadows. I did not creep. I grabbed the handles of both doors and threw them open with enough force that they banged against the walls with a thunderous crash. The laughter died instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. Harold dropped his wine glass. It shattered on the floor, spraying my 1982 Bordeaux all over his expensive white loafers. Linda gasped and covered her mouth. Courtney went pale, her eyes darting from me to Marcus. And Marcus, my son. He froze with his glass halfway to his mouth. He looked at me like he was seeing a corpse walk out of a grave. His face went gray. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. I stepped into the room. I did not yell. I did not scream. I walked slowly to the island, my boots clicking rhythmically on the tile. I looked at the shattered glass on the floor. I looked at the open bottle. Then I looked up and locked eyes with Harold. "The wine was a bit dry for your taste, was it not, Harold?" I asked, my voice smooth as silk. Harold stammered, backing away until he hit the refrigerator. "Ray, we thought... You thought I was dead?" I finished the sentence for him. I turned to Marcus. He was shaking now, the glass rattling in his hand. "Hi, Dad," he squeaked. I reached out and gently took the glass from his trembling fingers. I held it up to the light, inspecting the color. "You opened the 82, I said softly. "I told you that was for your mother and me." "Dad, I can explain." Marcus started sweating profusely. "We got a call. Someone said..." "Save it," I said, cutting him off. The calmness in my voice was more terrifying to them than any scream could have been. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the wine. It was excellent. It tasted like patience. It tasted like vengeance. I set the glass down on the counter with a sharp clink. I looked around the room, making eye contact with each of them. The greedy in-laws, the manipulative daughter-in-law, the traitorous son. "You were discussing the golf course," I said. "The back nine is it." Silence. "And you, Marcus, you were discussing the nursing home for your mother." Marcus looked down at his feet, unable to meet my gaze. "Well, I have some good news and some bad news," I said, leaning forward, my hands resting on the granite. "The good news is that I am perfectly healthy. No cancer, no dying." Courtney let out a small, involuntary sound that sounded like a choked sob of disappointment. "The bad news," I continued, my voice dropping an octave, "is that this house is not for sale, and neither is my dignity." I pulled out my phone and placed it on the counter. "And the worst news," I said, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes, "is that I just recorded the last 5 minutes of your conversation. And my lawyer Elijah is very interested in the part where you discussed defrauding a dying man." The color drained from Harold's face completely. "Now," I said, checking my watch, "get out of my house. All of you. Before I forget that I am a gentleman, and remember that I used to be a boxer. This was just the beginning. I had won the first round. But as I watched them scramble to gather their purses and keys, I knew this war was far from over. They had the power of attorney, they had the lawyers, and they had a desperation that would make them dangerous. But they made one fatal mistake. They forgot who I was. I am Ray Bishop, and I was just getting started." The silence in the kitchen was heavy enough to crush a man, but I had spent 40 years carrying steel beams, so I stood tall under the weight of it. My work boots left faint, dusty prints on the polished tile floor as I walked toward the island. I was still wearing my canvas jacket, the one with the frayed collar and the oil stain on the left sleeve. I looked like a laborer who had wandered into a country club banquet, but we all knew the truth. I was the one who paid the dues. "Is the wine good?" I asked again, my voice dropping to a rumble that vibrated in my chest. I did not shout. I did not need to. When you are the one holding the deed to the land, you do not need to raise your voice to be heard. I stared at the glass in Marcus's hand. The dark red liquid was trembling because his hand was shaking so violently. Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out except a pathetic squeak. His fingers lost their grip. The crystal glass slipped. It hit the granite countertop first, shattering the stem, then bounced onto the floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Red wine splattered across the white cabinets, looking disturbingly like fresh blood. "Oh my God," Marcus, Courtney shrieked, jumping back as if she had been shot. "Look what you did to the floor." She did not look at me. She looked at the mess. That was Courtney. She never saw the tragedy, she only saw the inconvenience. I did not flinch. I just kept walking until I was standing right in front of them. The smell of expensive cologne from Harold mixed with the sour scent of my son's fear. Courtney recovered first. Of course she did. She was a chameleon trained in the art of social survival. She smoothed her dress and forced a smile onto her face. It was a terrifying expression, one that did not reach her eyes. "Dad," she said, her voice pitching up an octave into that fake sweet tone she used when she wanted money. "You scared us. We were just so worried. When we heard about the cancer scare, we just wanted to be together. We were toasting to your health." Really? Lies. I could smell them on her breath, sweeter and more potent than the wine. "Toasting to my health," I repeated flatly. "With the bottle I saved for my anniversary, while discussing bulldozers and nursing homes." Courtney faltered, her smile twitching. "Well, we were just preparing for every contingency. You know how responsible Marcus is. He just wanted to make sure Mom was taken care of." I looked at Marcus. He was down on one knee trying to pick up the broken glass with his bare hands. He cut his finger. A drop of real blood mixed with the wine. He looked pathetic. He looked like a boy caught stealing from the cookie jar, not a 35-year-old man. "Leave it," I commanded. Marcus froze. "Stand up," I said. "Look at me." He slowly rose to his feet, clutching his bleeding finger. He would not meet my eyes. He looked at the fridge. He looked at the oven. He looked anywhere but at his father. I reached out and grabbed the neck of the 1982 Bordeaux sitting on the counter. It was still half full. This bottle was worth more than Marcus's first car. It was a symbol of 40 years of marriage, 40 years of struggle and triumph with Viola. And they had opened it like it was a $10 bottle of soda to celebrate my demise. I walked over to the sink. The drain was stainless steel, cold and unforgiving. "Hey now," Harold spoke up, stepping forward. His face was flushed red from the alcohol. "That is a $3,000 bottle of wine, Ray. Let us not be irrational. If you are alive, fine. Great. But there is no need to waste good liquor." I turned my head slowly to look at him. Harold Preston, a man who had never swung a hammer in his life, a man who made his fortune selling lemons to single mothers at 30% interest. He thought value was just a number on a price tag. "It is not waste, Harold," I said. "It is cleaning." I turned the bottle upside down. The wine gurgled out a dark purple stream, disappearing down the drain. Glug, glug, glug. The sound filled the room. It was the sound of their celebration dying. It was the sound of their inheritance washing away. Harold made a noise in the back of his throat like he was in physical pain watching the money disappear. Linda looked away, clutching her pearls. Courtney stared at the sink, her jaw tight. When the last drop was gone, I dropped the empty bottle into the sink. It clattered loudly against the metal. "Now," I said, turning back to face them, "I asked you to leave. Why are you still in my kitchen? I expected them to run. I expected them to apologize and scatter like roaches when the light comes on, but I had underestimated the desperation of greedy people." Marcus wiped his bleeding finger on his pants. He took a deep breath. I saw his posture change. He straightened his spine. He looked at Courtney, and she gave him a subtle nod, a signal. He turned to face me. The fear in his eyes was replaced by something else. Defiance. "We are not leaving, Dad," Marcus said. His voice was shaky at first, but it gained strength as he spoke. "In fact, you should probably sit down. We need to talk about the living arrangements." I narrowed my eyes. The audacity of this boy. "There is nothing to discuss," I said, stepping closer to him. "This is my house. You are guests, and your welcome just expired." "No," Marcus said, shaking his head. "That is where you are wrong. This is not just your house anymore. And Mom is not in a position to make decisions." "What did you say?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Courtney stepped in, standing next to her husband like a lawyer coaching a client. What Marcus is trying to say, Ray, is that we have noticed Viola has been declining lately. Her memory, her emotional state, it is getting dangerous. I laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. Your mother is sharper than all of you combined. She does the crossword puzzle in ink every morning. She was crying in the dark. Dad, Marcus interrupted. She was confused. She did not know when you were coming back. She was hysterical. Because you lied to her, I snapped. You told her I was dying. I told her the truth, Marcus shot back. I told her the prognosis was bad. If she was mentally stable, she would have waited for confirmation, but she panicked. She fell apart. That is proof, Dad. Proof that she cannot handle the estate, she cannot handle the finances, and she certainly cannot handle taking care of you if you get sick again. He reached into his back pocket. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought he was going to pull out a weapon, but it was something far worse. He pulled out a folded document. The paper was thick legal bond. We did this for her own good, Marcus said, unfolding the paper and smoothing it out on the wet countertop right next to the wine stain. We had Dr. Sterling evaluate her file last week. Based on her recent episodes of emotional instability and your health crisis, we executed an emergency power of attorney. I looked down at the paper. I saw Viola's signature at the bottom. It was shaky. It looked like she had signed it while her hand was trembling, while she was crying. What is this? I asked, though I knew exactly what it was. It is a transfer of guardianship, Marcus said. His voice was cold now, devoid of any sun-like warmth. As of this afternoon, I am the legal guardian of Viola Bishop and the executor of her assets. That includes her half of this property. I felt the blood rush to my head. My hands balled into fists at my sides. They had not just planned a funeral, they had staged a coup. You tricked her, I growled. You cornered a frightened woman and forced her to sign. We protected her, Courtney corrected me, her voice dripping with venom. We protected the family assets from being squandered by a woman who is clearly losing her grip on reality. And since you are technically her spouse but currently facing your own health issues, well, the court tends to favor the adult children in these situations. Harold chuckled from the corner. He had regained his confidence now that the paperwork was on the table. It is ironclad, Ray. My lawyers looked it over. You can yell and pour out all the wine you want, but the law is the law. Marcus took a step forward. He looked almost tall in that moment, fueled by the false power of a signature. So, here is how it is going to work, Dad. We are not leaving. In fact, we are moving in next week to oversee the transition. We found a great facility for Mom. Silver Meadows. It is secure. They specialize in dementia care. Dementia, I roared. She does not have dementia. She is confused, Marcus said, ignoring me. And you? Well, you are 72. You are tired. You do not need the stress of maintaining a 4-bedroom house on 3 acres. We are doing you a favor. We are going to sell the land to Harold's development group. The money will pay for Mom's care. And you can take the guest cottage, or maybe a room at the facility with Mom if you behave. The room spun. I looked at my son and saw a stranger. I saw a monster I had created with tuition checks and brand new cars. He was not just greedy. He was cruel. He was willing to label his own mother insane just to get his hands on a plot of dirt. I looked at the paper again. I wanted to rip it to shreds. I wanted to burn it, but I knew that would do no good. The original was filed. This was a trap, 40 years in the making. I looked up at Marcus. He was smiling now. A smug, victorious smile. He thought he had won. He thought the old construction worker was out of his depth. He thought paper beat rock. But Ray Bishop does not just know rocks. He knows dynamite. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I uncurled my fists. I needed them to think I was defeated. I needed them to think the old dog had no teeth left. I reached out and touched the paper. I ran my rough, callous finger over Viola's signature. So it is done then. I asked, my voice sounding defeated and tired. It is done, Marcus said. Do not fight it, Dad. It will just be embarrassing for everyone. I nodded slowly. I looked at Harold, who was smirking. I looked at Courtney, who was checking her nails. Okay, I whispered. Okay, Marcus asked, suspicious of my surrender. You win, I said, looking him dead in the eye. If the law says you are in charge, then you are in charge. I am just an old man, right? Maybe you are right. Maybe I am too tired to fight. Courtney let out a breath she had been holding. See, Marcus, I told you he would be reasonable. Harold clapped his hands together. Excellent. Now that that is settled, why don't we open another bottle? I think there is some scotch in the study. Marcus relaxed. His shoulders dropped. He thought the war was over. He had no idea that I had just retreated to the trenches. I turned to walk away. My shoulders were slumped. I dragged my feet. I played the part of the beaten father perfectly. I am going to check on your mother, I said quietly. Sure, Dad, Marcus called after me, his voice cheerful again. Tell her not to worry. We will handle everything from here. I walked out of the kitchen. As soon as I crossed the threshold into the dark hallway, my posture changed. I straightened my back. I wiped the look of defeat off my face. My eyes adjusted to the darkness. They had a piece of paper. They had a lawyer. They had a plan. But they had made one critical mistake. They had assumed that the house was the only thing I owned. They had assumed that Viola was weak. And they had assumed that I would play by their rules. I walked toward the basement door. I needed to see my wife. But first, I needed to find my old toolbox. Not the one with the hammers and wrenches. The one with the blueprints. The one with the geological surveys from 1975. The one that contained the secret that was buried 6 feet under the foundation of this house. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to use the law. Fine. I was about to teach them that the law is a double-edged sword, and I was going to be the one holding the handle. I opened the basement door and descended into the dark. The game had just begun. I looked down at the paper in my hands. It was a standard legal document, but it felt heavier than a bag of concrete. Power of attorney, guardianship transfer, asset liquidation authority. The words swam before my eyes, not because my vision was failing, but because the betrayal was so absolute it made me dizzy. I read the date next to my wife's signature. It was dated 2 days ago, the exact day I had left for Cleveland. I looked over at Viola. She was still standing in the doorway, her hands covering her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She looked like a child who had broken a vase and was waiting for a beating. But she was not the one who deserved punishment. Viola, I asked softly, my voice barely a whisper. Did you know what you were signing? She shook her head violently, tears flying from her eyes. No, Ray. Marcus told me you were in a coma. He said the doctors needed authorization to perform surgery. He said if I did not sign this, they would let you die. I closed my eyes. A coma. They had told the woman I loved for 40 years that I was lying on a deathbed just to get her to sign over the deed to our lives. It was not just fraud, it was psychological torture. I opened my eyes and looked at Marcus. He flinched. He knew that I knew. You told your mother I was in a coma, I asked. Marcus looked at Courtney. Courtney stepped forward, acting as his shield. It was a necessary exaggeration, Courtney said coolly. We needed to expedite the process. If we had waited for the official medical reports about your cancer, it would have taken weeks. We did not have weeks. The market is volatile, Ray. We needed to secure the assets now. A necessary exaggeration, I repeated. You made my wife believe she was a widow so you could steal her house. It is not stealing, Harold interjected from the corner. He was picking at his teeth with a toothpick, looking completely unbothered. It is aggressive estate planning. And quite frankly, Ray, you should be thanking us. We are saving you from making bad decisions in your senility. Look at you. You are emotional. You are unstable. You are pouring expensive wine down the sink. This is exactly why the court will uphold this document. You are not fit to lead this family anymore. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost blinded me. I wanted to reach across the granite island and wrap my hands around Harold's thick neck. I wanted to show him exactly how much strength this old man still had. But I did not move. I looked back at the document, Clause 14. In the event of Raymond Bishop's incapacity or absence, control of all real estate holdings reverts to the primary guardian, Marcus Bishop. Absence. They had used my 3-day trip as absence. I gripped the paper with both hands. The sound of the crisp bond paper crinkling filled the silent kitchen. This is garbage, I said, my voice rising. This is a lie based on a lie. I made a move to rip the paper in half. I was going to tear it into confetti and throw it in their smug faces. Do not bother, Courtney said. Her voice was sharp like a whip crack. I stopped. That is just a copy, Ray, she said, smiling that predatory smile again. The original is already filed with the county clerk. It is digitized. It is notarized. And our lawyer, Mr. Henderson, has the physical copy in his safe. You can tear that one up. You can burn it. You can eat it for all I care. It changes nothing. Legally, this house belongs to Marcus now. And by extension, us. I lowered the paper. She was right. I knew how the law worked. Once it was filed unringing, that bell was a nightmare. It would take months of court battles. Months that they knew I did not have the energy for. Or so they thought. Harold laughed again. That is the thing about you blue-collar types, Ray. You think you can solve everything with your hands. You think if you break something or build something, it changes reality. But the real world is run by paper. And on paper, you are just a guest in my son-in-law's house. My son-in-law. He had already claimed Marcus. He had branded him. I looked at Marcus. He was leaning against the counter staring at his shoes. He looked ashamed, but he did not speak up. He did not defend me. He let Harold insult the man who taught him how to walk. Marcus, I said, look at me. He slowly lifted his head. His eyes were watery. Is this what you want? I asked. Do you really want to kick your parents out of the home they built? Marcus swallowed hard. Dad, it is not like that. We are not kicking you out. Silver Meadows is a nice place. It has a garden. It has staff. You will be safe there. Safe, I scoffed. I am safe here. I am safe in the house where I raised you. Not anymore, Courtney interrupted. Not unless you play by our rules. She walked around the island and stood in front of me. She was short, but in that moment, she felt 10 feet tall because she held all the cards. Here is the deal, Ray, she said, ticking points off on her manicured fingers. You are old. Viola is mentally compromising. We cannot trust you with the property value, so you have two choices. Choice A is you cooperate. You sign the final transfer papers peacefully. You help us pack. And in exchange, we pay for a premium room at the nursing home. And choice B, I asked, my jaw tight. Choice B, she shrugged. We evict you. We get a court order claiming you are a danger to yourself and others. Given your little outburst with the wine bottle, that will be easy to prove. The police come. They drag you out in handcuffs in front of all the neighbors, and you end up in a state-run facility, the kind that smells like urine and bleach. The room went silent. Even Harold stopped picking his teeth. It was a naked threat, cruel and direct. But then Courtney softened her voice, a tactic she probably learned from her manipulative mother. However, she purred. There is a third option, just for tonight, since it is late. I waited. We can let you stay, Courtney said, benevolent as a queen. But not in the master bedroom. Harold and Linda will be taking the master suite tonight since they drove all the way from the city, and Marcus and I need the guest room to discuss the renovations. So where do we sleep? I asked, though I already knew the answer. The basement, Courtney said, pointing to the door I had just come up from. It is finished right. There is a pull-out couch down there. It is warm enough. You and Viola can sleep down there tonight. If you behave. If you do not make a scene. I looked at the basement door. Then I looked at Viola. She was trembling, terrified that they were going to call the police. If I fought them now, if I threw a punch or screamed, the police would come. And with the paperwork they had, I would be the aggressor. I would lose. I would lose Viola. I needed time. I needed access to my files. I needed to talk to Elijah. And most of all, I needed them to think they had broken me. I let my shoulders slump. I let the fire die out of my eyes. I exhaled a long, shaky breath. I made myself look smaller, older, weaker. I looked at Marcus one last time. I was searching for a glimmer of the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. But that boy was gone. In his place was a weak man who would sell his soul for a country club membership. You are putting us in the basement, I said, my voice cracking just enough to sound pathetic. In our own house. It is temporary, Dad, Marcus muttered. Just until we get things sorted. I nodded slowly. I looked down at the floor. Okay, I whispered. What was that? Harold asked, cupping his ear dramatically. I did not hear you, old man. I said, okay, I repeated louder but still keeping my head down. You win. We will take the basement. Just, please do not call the police. Viola cannot handle the police. Courtney smiled. a genuine smile of triumph. She clapped her hands together. "See," she said to the room, "I told you he would see reason. He knows when he is beaten." She reached out and patted my cheek. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to bite her hand off. "Good boy, Ray," she said. "Now go get your wife and head downstairs. And Ray, leave the wine cellar key on the counter. Harold might want another bottle later." I reached into my pocket. I pulled out the brass key. I placed it on the counter next to the wine stain. "Enjoy it," I said. I turned my back on them. I walked over to Viola. I put my arm around her shaking shoulders. "Come on, honey," I said softly. "Let's go downstairs." "But Ray," she sobbed. "Our bed." "It is okay," I whispered in her ear. "It is just for tonight. Trust me." I led her toward the basement door. Behind me, I heard the sound of another cork popping. I heard Harold laughing. I heard Courtney making a toast to new beginnings. They were celebrating their victory. They were celebrating the conquest of the Bishop estate. I opened the door and the smell of cool, damp air hit me. To them, it was a dungeon. To me, it was a command center. As I closed the door behind us, shutting out the light and the laughter of the parasites upstairs, my expression changed in the darkness. The sadness vanished. The defeat evaporated. I helped Viola down the stairs. "Stop crying, my love," I told her as we reached the bottom step. "Ray, what are we going to do?" she asked, looking around the dim room filled with boxes of my old business records. I walked over to a stack of dusty filing cabinets in the corner. I wiped the dust off the top of a metal box marked Project Phoenix 1975. "We are going to do what we always do, Viola," I said, unlocking the cabinet. "We are going to build what she asked." "A trap," I said, pulling out a roll of blueprints. "A trap so deep they will never climb out of it." I looked up at the ceiling where I could hear their footsteps walking all over my life. "Enjoy the wine, Marcus," I thought, "because tomorrow you are going to choke on it." The basement was cold. It was the kind of cold that settles into your bones and reminds you of every ache and pain you have collected over 72 years. The air down here tasted different. It did not smell like lavender and money like the floor above. It smelled of wet earth and old memories. It smelled of the late nights I spent down here analyzing blueprints when I was building this empire from scratch. I helped Viola sit down on the old pull-out sofa. The springs creaked under her weight, a sharp contrast to the silent plush furniture upstairs. This sofa was the first piece of furniture we ever bought together back when we lived in a studio apartment in Chicago. We had kept it for sentimental reasons. Now it was our bed. Viola was shaking. She still had her coat on, clutching the lapels tight around her neck as if she were freezing to death. But it was not the temperature that was making her shiver. It was the shock. "I am so sorry, Ray," she whispered. Her voice was broken, cracked by the weight of her guilt. "I am so stupid. I should have called the hospital. I should have waited. But Marcus," he sounded so sure. "He was crying, Ray. Our son was crying on the phone saying you were going to die if I did not sign." I sat down next to her and wrapped my heavy arm around her shoulders. I pulled her close. She buried her face in my chest and sobbed. I could feel her tears soaking into my shirt. "Listen to me, Viola," I said, my voice low and steady. "You are not stupid. You are a mother, and a mother will always walk through fire to save her family. Marcus knows that. He used your love against you. That is not your fault. That is his sin. But we lost the house," she wept. "We are in the basement, Ray. In our own house. How did it come to this?" I looked up at the ceiling. Above us, I could hear the muffled thumping of footsteps. I heard the scrape of a chair being dragged across the floor. I heard the faint vibration of bass from a stereo system. They were playing music. They were probably opening another bottle of my wine. They were walking all over us, quite literally. "We have not lost anything yet," I told her. Viola pulled back and looked at me. Her eyes were red and swollen. "But Ray, they have the papers. You saw them, the lawyers." "Lawyers know the law," I said, cutting her off. "But they do not know the land." I stood up. My knees popped, but I ignored the pain. I walked over to the unfinished part of the basement where the concrete foundation was exposed. I ran my hand along the rough gray wall. It was cool and damp to the touch. "Most people look at me and they see a contractor," I said, more to myself than to her. "They see a black man with calloused hands, and they assume I just followed instructions. They assume I just poured cement where the architect told me to pour it." I turned to look at Viola. They forget that before I started Bishop Construction, I was a geological engineer for the Army Corps of Engineers. They forget that I spent 5 years studying soil composition and water tables before I ever laid a single brick. Viola wiped her eyes. I remember, she said softly. You used to come home covered in mud talking about limestone and aquifers. Exactly, I said. I walked deeper into the shadows of the basement toward a row of metal shelving units that lined the far wall. These shelves were filled with cardboard boxes. Some were marked taxes, some were marked receipts. But the ones in the back, the ones covered in the thickest layer of dust, were the ones I was interested in. Marcus and his wife look at this house and they see square footage, I said. They see granite countertops and swimming pools. They see a $5 million price tag. I reached out and grabbed a box marked Site Surveys, 1980, 1990. I pulled it down. Dust motes danced in the dim light of the single hanging bulb. But they do not know what is underneath, I said. I carried the box to the small workbench I kept down there. I brushed off the dust and opened the lid. The smell of old paper wafted up. It was a sweet smell to me. It smelled like truth. Viola stood up and walked over to me. She was still shaky, but her curiosity was piquing. "What are you looking for, Ray?" she asked. I started flipping through the files. My fingers moved quickly despite their age. I knew exactly what I was looking for. "When I bought this land 30 years ago, everyone called me crazy," I said, not looking up. "Do you remember? They said it was too swampy. They said it was unstable. The developers would not touch it. That is why I got it so cheap." I remember Viola said, "You spent 6 months just draining the lot. Marcus was just a baby then." I nodded. I drained it. I reinforced it. I drove steel pylons 50 feet into the bedrock to make sure this house would never move an inch. I engineered a miracle to make this land buildable. I pulled out a large folded map. The paper was yellowed and brittle at the edges. I spread it out on the workbench, pushing aside a jar of rusty nails. But I also made a deal with the land, I whispered. I pointed to a series of blue lines drawn on the map. "This is the water table," I explained, tracing the lines with my finger. "And this red circle here, right where the backyard is, right where Courtney wants to put her new Olympic-sized swimming pool, this is a sinkhole waiting to happen." Viola gasped. "A sinkhole." "It is a subterranean limestone cavern," I said, using the technical term. "It is stable as long as the drainage system I built remains untouched. I designed a specific network of underground pumps and channels to keep the water pressure balanced. It is a delicate system, Viola, like a heartbeat." I looked up at the ceiling again, hearing the heavy footsteps of Harold probably pacing around my kitchen. "If they start digging," I said, a cold smile touching my lips. "If they bring in bulldozers to reshape the landscape, if they try to expand the foundation without consulting the original engineer, the house will collapse." Viola finished, her eyes wide. "Not the house," I corrected. "The house is anchored to the bedrock, but the backyard, the garden, and anything they try to build on it, it will be swallowed by the earth." I looked back down at the box. I dug deeper. Underneath the maps were the permits, the original permits from the county. "And here's the kicker," I said, pulling out a document with a faded official seal. "When I got these permits, I had to sign a waiver stating that any modification to the drainage system requires the approval of a certified geological engineer. Specifically, the original engineer of record." I tapped my chest. "Me." Viola looked at the paper, then at me. Her fear was starting to fade, replaced by a glimmer of hope. "So they cannot build without your permission?" she asked. "Oh, they can try," I said. "They have the power of attorney. They can bypass my signature at the permit office if they bribe the right people or if they claim I am incompetent. But nature does not take bribes, Viola. Physics does not care about lawyers." I closed the file and held it to my chest like a shield. "They think I am just a senile old man living in their basement," I said. "They do not realize that I am the only thing keeping the ground beneath their feet from opening up and eating them alive." I walked back to the sofa and sat down. I felt energized. The fatigue of the drive was gone. The shock of the betrayal was replaced by the thrill of the hunt. "Let them have their party," I said, taking Viola's hand. "Let them drink the wine. Let them dream about their millions. Because tomorrow morning when the sun comes up, I am going to make a phone call. Not to a lawyer, not to the police." "Who are you going to call?" Viola asked. "I am going to call the county water board," I said. "And then I am going to call my old friend Elijah. Because while nature will do the heavy lifting, we need someone to make sure the trap snaps shut legally." I looked at the boxes of files stacked against the wall. To Marcus and Courtney, they were just junk. just trash in a damp basement. But to me, they were ammunition. Every receipt, every contract, every email I had ever printed out. I never threw anything away. You know, Viola said, squeezing my hand, you always were a pack rat. I used to hate how you kept everything. I chuckled dryly. A smart man keeps his receipts. Viola, I said, and a wise man knows that the foundation is more important than the paint. The noise upstairs was getting louder. Someone dropped something heavy, a glass maybe, or a chair. They are destroying our home, Viola whispered, tears returning to her eyes. No, I said firmly. They are just rearranging the furniture on the Titanic. I stood up and walked to the light switch. Try to sleep, Viola, I said. We have a big day tomorrow. I turned off the light, plunging the basement into darkness. But it was not a scary darkness anymore. It was the darkness of a predator waiting in a cave. I lay down on the sofa next to my wife. I stared up into the blackness, listening to the footsteps of my enemies. Step lightly, Marcus, I thought. The ground is thinner than you think. And as I closed my eyes, I did not pray for mercy. I prayed for rain, because a heavy rain was all it would take to overload the old drainage pumps if they were not maintained. And I had a feeling that in their arrogance they had no idea where the pump switch was even located. I drifted off to sleep with the blueprints of my revenge etched behind my eyelids. They wanted a war. They wanted to bury me. They should have remembered that when you bury a seed, it grows. And I was about to grow into their worst nightmare. The smell of bacon usually wakes a man up with a smile, but that morning it woke me up with a knot in my stomach. I opened my eyes, and for a second I forgot where I was. I reached out for the nightstand to grab my glasses, but my hand hit a cold cardboard box instead. Then the reality rushed back in like a flood. I was in the basement. My back was stiff from the thin mattress of the pull-out sofa, and the woman I had loved for 40 years was not beside me. I sat up quickly, my heart pounding. Viola was gone. I threw the covers off and scrambled into my work pants. I did not even bother to tuck in my shirt. I ran up the wooden stairs, taking them two at a time, ignoring the protest of my aging knees. I pushed open the door to the kitchen, expecting the worst. What I found was perhaps more painful than violence. It was humiliation. My wife Viola was standing at the stove. She was wearing her favorite floral apron, the one she only wore for Thanksgiving dinner. But she was not cooking for family. She was cooking for her captors. Courtney was sitting at the granite island, scrolling through her phone while sipping a green smoothie. Harold and Linda were seated at the breakfast nook, reading the morning paper and waiting to be served. Flip them over, Viola. Courtney snapped without looking up from her screen. You are burning the edges. Harold likes his eggs over easy, not crispy. Viola flinched. She looked terrified. Her hands were shaking as she tried to slide the spatula under the eggs. I am sorry, Courtney, she whispered. The heat. This stove is different than I remember. It is the same stove you have used for 10 years, Viola, Courtney said, rolling her eyes. Do not play the senile card with me this early in the morning. Just cook the food. I stepped into the room. The floorboards creaked under my boots. Courtney looked up. Her eyes scanned me up and down, taking in my wrinkled shirt and my messy hair. She smirked. Good morning, Ray, she said with false cheer. I see you finally decided to join the land of the living. Grab a plate if there is anything left, but let the guests eat first. I did not look at her. I walked straight to Viola. I gently took the spatula from her hand. Stop, I said softly. Viola looked at me, her eyes swimming with tears. Ray, please, I just want to help. They said if I made breakfast we could eat in the kitchen instead of the basement. I felt a fire ignite in my chest. They were bargaining with her dignity for a seat at her own table. I turned off the burner. I took the apron off Viola's neck and folded it over the oven handle. You are not a maid, Viola, I said loud enough for everyone to hear. You are the lady of this house. Harold lowered his newspaper. He looked annoyed. Ray, do not start a drama, he said. Viola wanted to be useful. We are just letting her feel involved. Besides, the woman makes a decent scramble. Why ruin it? I turned to face him. Make your own eggs, Harold, I said. Courtney slammed her phone down on the counter. Okay, that is enough, she said, standing up. If you are going to be difficult, Ray, you can go outside. In fact, that is a great idea. Since you are so full of energy, why don't you make yourself useful? She pointed out the window to the sprawling back lawn. The grass is getting long, Ray. And since we are hosting the architects later this afternoon for the pool expansion meeting, I want the yard looking pristine. I looked at her. You want me to mow the lawn? Harold chuckled. Well, you are the one with the blue-collar experience, Ray. You look more natural pushing a mower than you do sitting at a negotiating table. It is good exercise for a man your age. Keeps the blood flowing. He took a bite of the toast Viola had just buttered for him. Go on, Ray Harold said, waving his hand dismissively. Earn your keep. We are paying for your nursing home eventually, remember. Consider this a down payment. I looked at Viola. She was terrified that I was going to explode. She grabbed my arm and squeezed it. Please, Ray, she whispered. Just do it. Please. I do not want them to send us away. I looked at my wife's pleading eyes. Then I looked at the smug faces of the people eating my food in my kitchen. If I refused, they would kick us out. If I fought, they would call the police. But if I went outside, I would be alone. I would be unobserved. And I would have access to the land. I took a deep breath. I forced my facial muscles to relax. I bowed my head slightly in mock submission. You are right, Harold, I said, my voice flat. I should earn my keep. The grass does look a bit messy. Courtney smiled triumphantly. She thought she had broken me. She thought she had turned Ray Bishop into the hired help. Good, she said. The keys to the riding mower are in the garage. Make sure you do the edges too. I hate sloppy edges. I walked out the back door. The morning air was cool, but the sun was already bright. I walked to the detached garage. My hands were trembling not from fear, but from the effort of holding back my rage. I opened the garage door. There it was, my John Deere riding mower. I had bought it 5 years ago. I kept it in perfect condition, just like all my equipment. I sat on the seat. It felt familiar. It felt like a throne compared to the basement sofa. I turned the key and the engine roared to life. The loud rumble was comforting. It drowned out the sound of their laughter coming from the kitchen. I drove the mower out onto the lawn. Harold came out onto the back porch, coffee mug in hand, to watch. He wanted to supervise. He wanted to enjoy the sight of the former owner working like a servant. I engaged the blades. The smell of cut grass filled the air. I started on the perimeter. To Harold, it looked like I was just cutting grass. But I was not just cutting grass. I was inspecting my territory. I drove slowly along the property line. My eyes were not looking at the weeds. They were looking at the drainage swales. I looked at the way the land sloped toward the creek at the back of the property. I remembered every inch of this dirt. I remembered where I had buried the French drains in 1992. I remembered where the clay soil was too soft to support weight. Then I saw it. Near the back fence where the property bordered the county wetlands, there were fresh stakes in the ground. Wooden stakes with bright orange ribbons tied to the top. I drove closer. Harold probably thought I was just being thorough. I stopped the mower for a moment, pretending to check the blade height. I looked closely at the stakes. My heart skipped a beat. These were survey markers for the new construction, for the pool Courtney wanted. But something was wrong. Very wrong. I looked at the fence line, then I looked at the stakes. I knew the zoning laws in this county better than I knew the back of my hand. I had served on the zoning board for 10 years. The law stated that you could not build any permanent structure within 50 feet of a protected wetland. It was a strict environmental protection ordinance. I looked at the creek. Then I looked at the stakes. They were 20 feet from the water, maybe 15. I smiled. It was a small, cold smile. They were planning to build illegally. But that was not all. I engaged the blades again and drove toward the center of the yard. I looked at the depression in the grass near the old oak tree. That depression sat directly on top of the main drainage culvert, the one that carried all the runoff from the hill away from the house's foundation. The survey stakes showed the pool deck extending right over that culvert. If they poured concrete there, they would crush the pipe, and the first time it rained, the water would have nowhere to go. It would back up. It would saturate the soil. And because of the limestone shelf underneath the ground, would liquefy. The sinkhole I had warned Viola about last night was not just a possibility. If they built this pool, it was a guarantee. I finished the lap and drove back toward the house. Harold was still standing on the porch. He looked bored. He checked his watch, implying I was moving too slow. I cut the engine. The silence returned. Missed a spot near the gazebo, Harold called out, pointing a chubby finger. I got off the mower. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with my sleeve. I walked up the steps to the porch. Harold smirked. Hard work, huh, Ray? Maybe you should have saved more for retirement so you could hire people like I do. I looked at him. I looked at his expensive loafers and his soft hands. It is good work, I said. It clears the mind. I looked past him into the kitchen window. I saw Courtney pointing at blueprints spread out on the table. So I asked, keeping my voice casual, "Where are you putting this famous pool?" Harold puffed out his chest. "Oh, it is going to be magnificent. Infinity edge, heated, right back there where the land slopes down. Courtney wants it to look like it is spilling into the creek." "Into the creek," I repeated. "That sounds expensive." "Money is no object when you are improving the asset value," Harold said. "We are breaking ground on Monday. The excavators are coming at 8 a.m. Monday. That gave me 2 days." "Did you get the permits yet?" I asked innocently. Harold laughed. "Permits? Ray, please. I have friends in the county clerk's office. We fast-tracked everything. It is all approved." I nodded. Fast-tracked. That meant they greased some palms. That meant they skipped the environmental impact survey. That meant no one had actually come out here to look at the land. They had just signed a paper assuming the land was standard dirt. They had no idea they were building on top of a hydrological time bomb. "That sounds great, Harold," I said. "I am sure it will make a big splash." I walked past him into the house. "Hey," Harold yelled after me. "I said you missed a spot. Go back and finish." I stopped. I turned around slowly. "I did not miss anything, Harold," I said. "I saw everything I needed to see." I walked into the kitchen. Viola was scrubbing dishes. She looked up at me worriedly. I walked over to the sink and washed my hands. The dirt from the yard swirled down the drain. "Ray, are you okay?" she whispered. I dried my hands on a towel. I looked out the window at the orange steaks glinting in the sun. "I am better than okay, Viola," I whispered back so Courtney could not hear. "I have found the breach in their armor." "What do you mean?" she asked. I leaned in close. "They are building on protected land," I said, "and they are building over a drain pipe that I installed with my own hands." "So?" Viola asked, confused. So I said, a dangerous glint in my eye. "If they dig on Monday, they are committing a federal environmental crime. And if they pour concrete, they are going to destroy the foundation of the house." I looked at Courtney, who was happily chatting on the phone about tile colors. "They think they are developers," I said, "but they are just children playing in a sandbox with a loaded gun." I checked my pocket. I had my phone. "I am going to take a shower," I told Viola, "and then I am going to make a phone call to the Department of Environmental Protection, and maybe one to the Army Corps of Engineers." "Ray, be careful," Viola said. "Do not worry," I said, kissing her forehead. "I am just being a good citizen. Reporting a code violation is my civic duty." I walked toward the basement door. "Oh," and Ray Courtney called out without looking at me. "When you are done showering, we need you to move your truck. It is an eyesore in the driveway. Park it on the street." I stopped. My truck. The truck I had used to build this house. "Sure, Courtney," I said. "I will move it." I walked down the stairs into the darkness of the basement. I sat down on the edge of the sofa. I pulled out my phone. My hands were steady now. I dialed the number for Elijah. "Hello?" the gruff voice answered. "Elijah," I said. "It is Ray." "Ray, I heard you were in trouble," Elijah said. "I was," I said. "But things are looking up." I looked at the ceiling, imagining the swimming pool crashing down into the basement. "I need you to prepare an injunction," I said, "but not yet. I want you to have it ready for Monday morning." "Monday?" Elijah asked. "Why Monday?" "Because," I said, smiling, "that is when the excavators arrive. And I want to make sure that when they break the law, there is a witness with a badge standing right there to see it." I hung up the phone. I lay back on the couch and closed my eyes. Harold wanted me to do manual labor. He wanted me to be the gardener. Fine. I would be the gardener. And I was going to weed out the parasites one by one. The first bullet was loaded, and my aim had never been better. I parked my truck around the corner from the brownstone building in downtown Atlanta. This was not the part of the city where the glass skyscrapers touched the clouds and the lawyers wore $3,000 suits. This was the old district. The brickwork here was from the 1920s and the sidewalks were cracked from the roots of ancient oak trees. It was the part of the city that had character, just like the man I was about to see. I checked my rearview mirror one last time to make sure I had not been followed. I half expected to see Marcus's BMW or Harold's Mercedes trailing me, but the street was empty. They were too busy measuring drapes and planning pool parties to worry about where the old man went. They thought I was defeated. They thought I was just moving my eyesore of a truck to a side street to keep their driveway pretty. I walked up the steps to the office of Elijah Gold. The brass plaque on the door was tarnished and the paint was peeling, but the lock was solid. I knocked 3 times, a rhythm we had established 30 years ago when we were both young men trying to survive in a world that did not want to give us an inch. The door buzzed and clicked open. I stepped inside. The office smelled of stale cigar smoke, old leather, and dust. It was a smell that calmed me instantly. It was the smell of the law before it became a corporate machine. Elijah was sitting behind a desk that looked like it had been carved out of a single redwood tree. He was a small man with wild white hair and thick glasses that magnified his eyes, making him look like a wise old owl. He was Jewish, and I was black, and in the South in the 70s that meant we were natural allies. We had fought zoning boards together. We had fought discriminatory lending practices together. And today, we were going to fight my family. Ray, he said, his voice raspy from years of tobacco. You look like hell. I feel like hell. Elijah, I said, sitting down in the leather chair opposite him. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the photo I had taken of the document on my phone. I slid the phone across the desk. Tell me what I am looking at, I said. Elijah put on a second pair of glasses over his first pair. He peered at the screen. He scrolled. He frowned. He hummed a low note of disapproval that rumbled in his throat. This is a power of attorney, he said finally, and a guardianship transfer. It is dated 2 days ago. Is it legal, I asked. Elijah leaned back in his chair. Technically, yes. The form is standard. The signatures are notarized. On the surface, it grants your son Marcus full control over Viola's assets and medical decisions based on her incapacity. And since you are listed as the secondary guardian but were absent during the signing, he trailed off, looking at me over his glasses. They trapped her, Elijah, I said, my voice tight. They told her I was dying. They told her she had to sign to save me. And now they are using it to say she is incompetent and I am too old to intervene. Elijah took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. It is dirty, Ray. It is filthy. But it is a very common play. The courts are clogged. By the time we file a motion to contest this, by the time we get a competency hearing for Viola, months will have passed. And in those months, Marcus can do a lot of damage. He can sell assets, he can move money, he can put Viola in a home. So we sue them, I said. We sue them for fraud. Elijah shook his head. We can. But fraud is hard to prove in family court. It becomes he said, she said. Marcus will say he was acting in her best interest. He will bring in that doctor friend of his to testify that Viola was hysterical. It will be messy, Ray. And while we fight, they will still have control of the house. I looked at the dusty books on the shelf behind him. Law books. Thousands of pages of rules designed to keep order. But sometimes order was not justice. I do not want to sue them, Elijah, I said quietly. Elijah looked surprised. You do not. Ray, they are stealing your life. I know I said, but a lawsuit is a warning shot. If we file papers now, they will lawyer up. They will hide the money. They will cover their tracks. They will play the victim. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. I do not want to warn them, I said. I want to bury them. Elijah smiled slowly, a wicked little smile that showed his gold tooth. I am listening, he said. They are getting greedy, I explained. They are not just content with the house. They want to develop the land. They are bringing in excavators on Monday to dig a pool over a drainage culvert on protected wetlands. And last night I heard Harold talking about using the property as collateral for a $5 million loan that he plans to default on. Elijah whistled low and long. Bank fraud, he whispered, and environmental negligence. Now we are talking about felonies, Ray. We are talking about prison time, not just civil penalties. Exactly, I said. But they have not done it yet. They have only planned it. So we wait, Elijah said, understanding dawning in his eyes. We wait, I confirmed. 8. We let them think they have won. We let them think I am a broken old man who just wants to mow the lawn and sleep in the basement. We let them dig that hole. We let them sign those loan papers. I pointed a finger at Elijah. I want you to draft the injunctions Ray said. I want you to have the environmental violation report ready. I want you to have the paperwork proving that the house is actually owned by a holding company they did not bother to check. but do not file anything. Not yet. Elijah nodded, tapping his fingers on the desk. You want to catch the whole net, he said. You want the in-laws, the son and the daughter-in-law. All of them. Every single one, I said. If I strike now, I might get the house back, but the family is broken anyway. Marcus is gone, Elijah. The boy I raised is dead. The man who is living in my house is a thief, and I need to treat him like a thief. Elijah opened his drawer and pulled out a fresh notepad. Okay, Ray, he said, his pen hovering over the paper. This is risky. If they move faster than we think, if they sell the house for cash before Monday, they won't, I said. They are arrogant. Harold wants to show off. He wants to build his little resort. Arrogance is slow, Elijah. Desperation is fast, but arrogance takes its time to admire itself in the mirror. I stood up. I felt lighter than I had in days. Having a plan was better than having a prayer. One more thing, I said. Can you look into Courtney's medical records? Or rather, the lack of them. Elijah looked up sharply. Why? Because I said, remembering the look on Courtney's face when she talked about her son. My grandson. He does not look like anyone in the Bishop family. And yesterday, when I found the medical file in the safe, well, let's just say I have a hunch that Marcus is raising another man's child. Elijah scribbled furiously on his pad. You are going for the nuclear option, he muttered. They tried to put my wife in the asylum, Elijah. I said, my voice dropping to a growl. There is no nuclear option. There is only the truth, and the truth is going to burn them all to ash. I turned to leave. Ray, Elijah called out. I stopped at the door. Be careful, he said. When you corner a rat, it bites. But when you corner a family member, they go for the throat. I touched the brim of my cap. I know, I said. That is why I am wearing armor. I walked back out into the sunlight. The city noise washed over me. Cars, honking people shouting. It all seemed so distant. My world had narrowed down to one house, one plot of land, and one objective. I walked back to my truck. I climbed into the cab and sat there for a moment, breathing in the smell of old coffee and gasoline. This truck was my sanctuary. I started the engine and drove back toward the suburbs, back to the manicured lawns and the white fences, back to the prison. When I pulled up to the house, I saw the landscaping truck leaving. The grass was cut. The edges were perfect. I parked on the street just like Courtney had ordered. I walked up the driveway, my head bowed, my shoulders slumped. I saw Marcus watching me from the living room window. He was holding a glass of scotch. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. Look at him, I thought. Look at how tall he stands. He had no idea that the ground beneath his feet was already starting to crack. I opened the front door, and the blast of air conditioning hit me. Did you move the truck? Courtney yelled from the kitchen. Yes, I called back, my voice trembling just enough. It is on the street. Good, she said. Now come in here. We need you to sign for a package. It is the new pool tiles. Since you are just sitting around anyway, you can handle the deliveries. I walked into the kitchen. I took the pen she offered. I signed my name on the clipboard, Ray Bishop. The delivery guy looked at me. Nice house, sir, he said. I looked at Courtney. I looked at Marcus, who had just walked in. Thank you, I said. It has a lot of history. And a hell of a future, Harold added, clapping me on the back. I smiled at him, a weak, tired smile. I am sure it does, Harold, I said. I am sure it does. I walked back to the basement door. I am going to rest now, I said. My hip is bothering me. Go ahead, Marcus said. Just keep the noise down. We have guests coming at 7. I closed the basement door. I walked down the steps. Viola was waiting for me. Well, she asked. I sat down next to her and took her hand. It is a go, I said. Elijah is setting the table. And now Viola asked. And now I said, lying back on the couch and closing my eyes. We let them eat. We let them get fat and happy. Because on Monday, the bill comes due. I lay there in the dark, listening to the sounds of my house being stolen piece by piece, but I did not feel anger anymore. I felt the cold calculation of a demolition expert. I knew exactly where to place the charges, and I knew exactly when to push the button. Monday. Monday would be a beautiful day for a demolition. I sat in my truck for 5 minutes before opening the door. I was not preparing myself to fight. I was preparing myself to lose. The meeting with Elijah had lit a fire in my belly, but now I had to smother it. To pull this off, I had to become the very thing I despised. A victim, a helpless old man who had lost his grip on the world. I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were too bright, too sharp. I rubbed them until they were red and watery. I messed up my hair, pulling a few strands loose so I looked disheveled. I unbuttoned the top button of my flannel shirt, letting it hang askew. Then I practiced the cough. A deep, wet rattle that sounded like my lungs were giving up. It was a trick I learned from an old foreman back in '82 to get out of overtime, but today it was going to save my legacy. The hardest part of being a wolf is learning how to bleat like a sheep, but for Viola and for the land I would bleat until my throat was sore. I opened the truck door and stepped out. I did not jump down like I usually did. I slid out slowly, letting my feet drag on the concrete. I hunched my shoulders, curling my spine forward just enough to lose 2 inches of height. I walked up the driveway with a shuffle, my left leg dragging slightly behind the right. I opened the front door. The house smelled different. It smelled of takeout food, greasy pizza and spicy wings, the smell of lazy people who did not know how to cook a meal. I walked into the living room. They were all there. Of course they were. They were like a pack of hyenas gathered around a carcass. Marcus was sitting on the sofa, my sofa, with his feet up on the coffee table. He was watching a football game on the big screen TV. Courtney was on the floor, surrounded by fabric swatches and paint samples. Harold was asleep in my recliner, his mouth open, snoring loudly. No one looked up when I entered. To them, I was already part of the furniture. Just an old, creaky antique that they had not gotten around to throwing out yet. I let out a cough. A long, hacking sound that shook my whole body. Harold snorted and woke up. Marcus paused the game and looked over the back of the sofa. He looked annoyed. "Jesus, Dad," Marcus said. "Can you cover your mouth? We are trying to relax here." "I am sorry," I rasped, my voice trembling. "It is the dust. The basement. It is very dusty down there, Marcus. My chest feels tight." Marcus rolled his eyes. He turned back to the TV. "We'll take some water. The kitchen is right there." I took a few shaky steps into the room. I needed to get closer. I needed to look him in the eye and see if there was any humanity left in him. "Marcus," I said softly. He sighed, a long, exaggerated sound of frustration. "What is it now, Dad?" I need to go to the pharmacy," I said, wringing my hands together like a nervous child. "My prescription ran out. The blood pressure pills. And the inhaler." "So go," Marcus said, not looking away from the screen. "You have a truck. You can drive." I patted my pockets frantically. I do not have any cash, Marcus. "And you know the pharmacy copay? It is $40. I left my wallet in the bedroom, but Courtney said I cannot go in there because Harold is sleeping." I looked at Harold. He was awake now, staring at me with that same look of disdain he gave the waiter when his steak was overcooked. "I just need $50, son," I pleaded. "Just for the medicine. I will pay you back when the pension check comes." The room went silent. Courtney stopped looking at fabric samples. She looked up, her eyes narrowing. Marcus slowly put the remote down. He stood up and turned to face me. He looked at his father, a man who had built skyscrapers and bridges, begging for $50 to breathe. "You need money?" Marcus asked. "Just for the medicine," I repeated. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You know, Dad, this is exactly what we were talking about. You are irresponsible. You are losing track of things. You have a pension. You have Social Security. Where does it go?" I paid the utility bills," I lied. "And the property tax. It is all gone until the 1st of the month." Courtney stood up and walked over to Marcus. She whispered something in his ear. I saw him nod. "Dad," Marcus said, his voice taking on a stern, authoritative tone. "We cannot have this. We cannot have you begging for cash every time you need an aspirin. It is embarrassing. And it proves that you are not capable of managing your own finances anymore." He held out his hand. "Give it to me," he said. "Give you what?" I asked, clutching my chest as I coughed again. "The bank card," Marcus said. "The debit card for your pension account." I froze. I widened my eyes, feigning terror. But that is my money, Marcus. That is all I have." "Not anymore," Marcus said, cold as ice. "The power of attorney gives me control over your liquid assets too. If you cannot budget for medicine, then I have to do it for you. I will keep the card. I will buy your groceries. I will buy your medicine. And I will give you a weekly allowance, like a child. Because you are acting like a child, Courtney added, crossing her arms. I looked at Harold. He was grinning. Give it to the boy Ray, he said. He has an MBA. He knows how to handle money better than you do. You will just spend it on useless things, like repairing that old truck. I looked back at Marcus. Please, son, I whispered, do not take my independence. I am not taking your independence, Marcus said, snapping his fingers impatiently. I am taking the burden off your shoulders. Now give me the card. Or do I have to call the lawyer and tell him you are being non-compliant? Non-compliant. That was the magic word. That was the threat of the nursing home. I slowly reached into my back pocket. My hand shook violently. I pulled out my old leather wallet. It was worn at the edges, cracked from years of sweat and work. I opened it. There was a picture of Marcus when he was 5 years old in the clear plastic window. I made sure he saw it. I saw him glance at it, and for a second, just a microsecond, I saw a flicker of guilt. But then Courtney touched his arm, and the guilt vanished. I pulled out the blue debit card. Horizon Bank. It was a valid card. It had my name on it. But what they did not know, what they had not bothered to check in their arrogance, was that this was a secondary account. It was the account I used for petty cash, for gas station coffee and newspapers. It had exactly $312.50 in it, and a daily withdrawal limit of $100. My real money, the money from the sale of my first company, the dividends from my investments, the millions I had quietly accumulated over 40 years, was sitting safely in a high-yield trust account at a completely different bank. A bank that required a fingerprint and a retinal scan to access. A bank that Elijah had locked down tight this morning under the name of the Viola Bishop Charitable Trust. But to them, this piece of blue plastic was the key to the kingdom. I held it out. My fingers refused to let go for a moment, selling the performance. Marcus snatched it from my hand. Finally, he said. He looked at the card. He smiled. See, Dad, that was not so hard. Now I will go to the pharmacy for you later. Just write down what you need. Later, I asked. But I need it now. We are busy, Ray Courtney snapped. We are picking colors for the pool house. You are not going to die in the next 2 hours. Go downstairs. Rest. We will bring you a pill when we are ready. Marcus slipped the card into his pocket. My card. In his pocket. Go on, Dad, he said, sitting back down on the couch, and closed the door to the basement. The draft is making the living room cold. I stood there for a moment looking at them. They had taken my house. They had taken my dignity. And now they thought they had taken my money. I lowered my head. Thank you, son, I mumbled. Thank you for taking care of me. I turned around and shuffled back toward the hallway. I heard them laughing as I walked away. Did you see his face? Harold chuckled. Like a kicked puppy. He is totally gone, Courtney said. I told you, the dementia is setting in fast. He gave that card up without a fight. He does not even know what day it is. We should check the balance, Marcus said. I bet the old miser has a nice chunk of change stashed in there. We can use it to pay for the catering for the groundbreaking party. I reached the basement door. I opened it and stepped into the darkness. As soon as the latch clicked shut, my posture straightened. The shuffle disappeared. The cough vanished. I walked down the stairs with the silent, confident steps of a man who knows exactly where the landmines are buried. I sat down next to Viola, who was folding clothes on the sofa. Did they give you the money? She asked worriedly. No, I said. They took the bait. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app for the Horizon account. I watched the screen. 5 minutes later, a notification popped up. Alert failed transaction. Attempted charge of $500 at Liquor World. I chuckled. They were trying to buy expensive champagne with my money to celebrate stealing my money. Another notification. Alert transaction approved. $100 at Liquor World. They had hit the daily limit. They probably thought the account was empty or frozen. I could imagine the frustration in the kitchen right now. I could imagine them blaming the bank, blaming the card reader. But they would not blame me, because in their eyes I was just a helpless old fool who could barely tie his own shoes. They have the card, Viola, I said, putting the phone away. They think they have cut off my supply lines. And now, Viola asked. And now they stop looking, I said. A predator stops hunting when he thinks the prey is dead. They will lower their guard. They will get sloppy. I lay back on the pillow. Let them enjoy their $100 of liquor, I said. It will be the last drink they ever buy on my dime. The mask of the victim is heavy, Viola. It hurts to wear it. It hurts to let my own son treat me like a dog. But I wear it for you, and I wear it for this house. Tomorrow is Sunday. They will be hungover. They will be lazy. And while they sleep, I will be preparing the final blow. I looked at the water pipes running along the ceiling of the basement. The pressure is building, I whispered, and when it bursts, it is going to wash them all away. The house did not smell like my house anymore. For 40 years, the air in these halls had smelled of lemon oil and old books and the faint, comforting scent of Viola's perfume. But tonight it smelled of raw ambition and expensive cologne. It smelled of strangers. It smelled of a hostility so thick you could choke on it. Saturday evening had arrived, and with it came the final insult. I was sitting on the edge of the pull-out sofa in the basement adjusting the collar of a cheap white dress shirt that was 2 sizes too small. The polyester fabric scratched against my neck. It felt less like a shirt and more like a noose. Viola sat next to me. She was wearing a black skirt and a white blouse that Courtney had thrown down the stairs an hour ago. My wife looked small. She looked defeated. Her hands were resting in her lap and she was rubbing her thumb over her wedding ring as if it were the only anchor keeping her from drifting away completely. "Do I look okay, Ray?" she asked, her voice trembling. I turned to look at her. In my eyes, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. She was the woman who had stood by me when we had nothing but a rusted pickup truck and a dream. But tonight, the light in her eyes was dim. "You look beautiful, Viola," I said. "You always do." "But I do not feel beautiful," she whispered. "I feel like a ghost in my own home." I took her hand. Her skin was cold. "Listen to me," I said, gripping her hand tight. "This is not a uniform. This is a costume. We are actors on a stage, Viola, and tonight is the final performance." Just then, the basement door opened. "Are you two ready down there?" Courtney's voice, shrill and demanding, floated down the stairs. "The guests are arriving in 10 minutes, and Ray, do not forget the bow tie. We want this to look professional." I picked up the black clip-on tie from the cushion. I clipped it onto my collar. I felt ridiculous. I was Ray Bishop. I was a man who had employed hundreds of workers. I was a man who had built half the foundations in this county. And now I was being dressed up like a penguin to serve hors d'oeuvres to the people who were stealing my legacy. We walked up the stairs. The transformation of the main floor was shocking. They had moved our furniture into the garage. In its place were sleek high-top tables rented for the night. They had taken down our family photos, the pictures of Marcus graduating, the pictures of our anniversaries. In their place were large architectural renderings on easels. I walked over to one of the easels. It showed a glossy digital image of my backyard. But it was not my backyard. The oak tree was gone. My garden was gone. In their place was a massive infinity pool and a modern glass guest house. The title at the bottom read, "The Bishop Estate Luxury Redevelopment." "Do not touch the displays," Courtney snapped, appearing behind me. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my truck. Her hair was piled high on her head and she was holding a clipboard like a weapon. I stepped back, keeping my head down. "Sorry," I mumbled. "It looks impressive." "It will be," Courtney said, checking her watch. "Once we secure the bridge loan tonight from the investors. That is why you two are here." She looked at us with a cold, critical eye. "Listen closely," she said. "We fired the catering staff this morning." "You what?" Viola asked, shocked. "We let them go," Courtney said, shrugging. "They were charging too much. And Harold said it sends a better message to the investors if we show cost control. Why pay strangers to pass out napkins when we have family who are living here rent-free?" Rent-free, the words burned in my chest. "So here are the rules," Courtney continued. "You pour the champagne, you pass the trays, you clear the empty glasses, you do not speak to the guests unless spoken to. And if anyone asks who you are just helping out. Do not go into your life story. Do not talk about the old days. Nobody cares. And Ray," she added, pointing a manicured finger at my chest, "keep that cough under control. Nothing kills an investment vibe like a sick old man wheezing over the shrimp cocktail." I nodded. "Yes, Courtney." "Good," she said. "Now get to the kitchen. The caterer dropped off the food, but someone needs to plate it." We walked into the kitchen. It was a war zone of silver platters and crystal glasses. Harold was there tasting a piece of smoked salmon. About time he mumbled his mouth full. Ray grabbed that tray of champagne. The first car just pulled up. "It is the guys from Venture Capital Partners. Big money, Ray. Try not to spill it on them." I picked up the heavy silver tray. The cold glass of the flute stems pressed against my fingers. I took a deep breath. I walked out into the foyer just as the front door opened. For the next hour, I became invisible. I watched as a parade of wealthy strangers invaded my sanctuary. Men with soft hands and hard eyes. Women who looked at the crown molding and calculated the resale value. They walked across my hardwood floors with their sharp heels, leaving little dents that made me wince. I weaved through the crowd offering drinks. Champagne, sir. Champagne, ma'am. Most of them did not even look at me. They just took the glass and turned their backs. To them, I was just a pair of hands, a prop. I saw Marcus holding court in the center of the room. He was wearing a tuxedo that I knew I had paid for. He was laughing too loud, drinking too much. He had his arm around a man I recognized. It was Mr. Sterling, the loan officer from the bank. "So the land is unencumbered?" Mr. Sterling asked, swirling his drink. "Completely." Marcus lied smoothly. "My father signed over full control. We have the deed. We have the permits. We break ground Monday." "Excellent," Mr. Sterling said. "Then I do not see any hurdles for the $5 million. We can have the papers ready for signing on Tuesday." I stood 3 feet away holding a tray of empty glasses. Marcus looked right through me. He did not see his father. He saw a servant. I walked back to the kitchen to reload. That was when I saw Viola. She was standing near the buffet table, struggling with a heavy platter of oysters. Her arthritis was flaring up, I could tell by the way she bit her lip. A large man in a gray suit bumped into her. The platter wobbled. A single oyster slid off and fell onto the man's polished shoe. "Hey, watch it," the man snapped. He looked down at his shoe with disgust. "Oh my goodness, I am so sorry," Viola stammered, putting the tray down and reaching for a napkin. "I will clean it up." "You better clean it up," the man sneered. "God, where do they find this help? You are clumsy." He kicked his foot out toward her, waiting for her to kneel. Viola lowered herself slowly to her knees. My wife, the woman who was the queen of this house, kneeling on the floor to wipe slime off a stranger's shoe. The rage that hit me was not red. It was white. It was blinding. I dropped my tray on the counter with a loud clang. I started to march toward them. I was going to grab that man by his expensive tie and throw him through the front window. I did not care about the plan. I did not care about the trap. No one treated Viola like that. But before I could take 3 steps, Viola looked up. She saw me coming. She saw the violence in my eyes. And she shook her head. Just a tiny microscopic shake. Her eyes were pleading with me. She was saying, "Don't blow it now." She wiped the man's shoe. She stood up. She apologized again. The man grunted and walked away. I stopped. I gripped the edge of the granite counter until my knuckles turned white. I felt like my heart was going to explode. Viola walked over to me. She was trembling, but her head was high. "Ray," she whispered. I looked at her. I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. "He made you kneel," I hissed, my voice choking with emotion. "It does not matter," she said softly. "It is just dirt. It wipes off." "It matters to me," I said. "Ray," she said, putting her hand on my chest right over my beating heart. "Look at them." I looked out at the party, at the laughter, at the greed. "They are drunk on power," she said. "They think they are gods, but gods do not notice the ants. And that is why the ants win." I took a deep breath. She was stronger than me. In that moment, she was stronger than iron. I grabbed a fresh bottle of champagne. 2 hours, I whispered to her. What she asked. "Just 2 hours," I said. "Can you hold on for 2 hours?" "I can hold on forever," she said, "as long as you are with me." "Then let's finish this," I said. I walked back out onto the floor. But I was not just serving drinks anymore. I was listening. I circulated near the key players. I stood near Harold as he bragged to a developer. "We are going to cut corners on the retaining wall." Harold laughed quietly. "The soil is solid. We do not need the extra reinforcement. That will save us 50 grand right there." I filed that away. Intentional negligence. I moved near Courtney, who was talking to her architect. "Do not worry about the creek," she said. "We will just divert the runoff into the main pipe. If it overflows, it is the county's problem, not ours." I filed that away. Violation of water management statutes. I moved near Marcus. "I feel bad for the old man sometimes," Marcus was saying to a friend. "He looks so pathetic in that little bow tie. But hey, he had his run. It is my turn now." I filed that away too. That one was not for the lawsuit. That one was for my soul. That one was the final lock clicking shut on the door of my mercy. The party roared on. The noise was deafening. But inside my head it was silent. I was counting down the minutes. At 9 o'clock, Harold tapped a spoon against his glass. The room quieted down. "Ladies and gentlemen," Harold boomed, his face flushed with alcohol and victory. "If I could have your attention." The guests turned toward the fireplace where Harold, Marcus, and Courtney were standing. They looked like a royal family posing for a portrait. "We are so glad you could join us tonight," Harold said. "We are here to celebrate not just a renovation, but a revolution. For too long, this prime piece of real estate has been underutilized. It has been stuck in the past." He gestured vaguely toward the kitchen where Viola and I were standing in the shadows. "But tonight, we turn the page," Harold declared. "Tonight, we announce the beginning of the Bishop Preston estate, a symbol of modern luxury and smart investment." The crowd applauded. Marcus beamed. Courtney raised her glass. I watched them toast to a future that did not exist. I looked at Viola. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Let them have their applause, I thought. Let them have their moment in the sun, because the storm is coming, and I am the thunder. I turned back to the sink and started washing the crystal glasses, one by one. Careful, methodical, I did not break a single glass, because Ray Bishop does not break things. He fixes them, and tomorrow morning I was going to fix this family permanently. The VIP table was set up near the French doors where the light from the crystal chandelier hit the hardest. It was the center of gravity for the entire room. Harold sat there like a mob boss holding court, surrounded by 3 men in suits that cost more than my first house. These were the investors, the sharks. I knew their type. I had dealt with men like them back in the 80s, men who looked at a neighborhood and saw only spreadsheets, men who would pave over a cemetery if the zoning board allowed it. I stood in the shadows of the dining room adjusting my bow tie. It felt like a choke collar. My feet ached in the cheap dress shoes Courtney had forced me to wear, but my mind was razor sharp. I watched Harold pour a glass of whiskey for a man with silver hair and a watch that glinted aggressively in the light. That was Mr. Sterling, the banker, the man who was supposed to rubber stamp the loan that would bury my legacy. I needed to know what they were saying. The ambient noise of the party was too loud, a wall of chatter and clinking glass that drowned out their conversation. I could not just walk up and stand there. I needed ears on the ground. I reached into my pocket and touched the small cold metal object I had retrieved from my basement toolbox earlier. It was a remote acoustic sensor, a tiny device no bigger than a quarter that I used to snake down into pipes to listen for leaks or structural stress in the foundation. It was magnetized, it was durable, and it could transmit audio to an app on my phone from up to 50 feet away. Courtney walked past me, snapping her fingers. "Ray," she hissed, "the VIP table is empty. Refill them. And smile, for God's sake. You look like you were at a funeral." I looked at her. In a way, I was. I was at the funeral of her greed. I forced a tight grimace onto my face. "Yes, Courtney." I grabbed a fresh bottle of the premium scotch from the bar cart. I put a napkin over my arm. I walked toward the table. As I approached, the conversation died down. They looked at me with the indifference reserved for furniture. I was just the old black servant pouring the drink. I was invisible. I leaned in to pour Mr. Sterling's glass. My hand shook slightly. "Steady there, old-timer," Sterling said with a condescending chuckle. "Don't spill the good stuff." "I am sorry, sir," I mumbled, playing the part. My hands, not what they used to be. I moved around the table, filling glasses. When I got to Harold, he did not even look up. He was busy lighting a cigar. I saw my opportunity. The table had a heavy iron base. Perfect. I pretended to stumble. My knee buckled and I bumped into the table edge. The glasses rattled. "Whoa, careful," Harold snapped, glaring at me. "Jesus, Ray, if you cannot walk, go sit down." "I am sorry, Harold," I stammered, dropping to one knee as if to steady myself. I just slipped." While I was down there, obscured by the tablecloth, I reached up. With a quick, practiced motion, I stuck the magnetic sensor to the underside of the heavy metal table support. It clicked silently into place. I pulled myself up, groaning like an old man in pain. I will go get a cloth," I said, backing away. "Just go." Harold waved me away. "Get out of here before you break something." I retreated to the kitchen. I walked past Viola, who was arranging crackers on a tray. "Did you do it?" she whispered. I nodded. "Keep watch," I said. I slipped into the pantry. It was a small, narrow closet where we kept the dry goods. I closed the door and sat down on a bucket of paint I had hidden in there. I pulled out my phone. I put in my earbuds. I opened the app. A flat line appeared on the screen. Then as the connection stabilized, the line jumped. It turned into a waveform. The sound was crystal clear. It was as if I was sitting right next to them. I heard the clink of ice. I heard the puff of the cigar. "Okay," Harold's voice came through rich and smug. "The help is gone. We can talk business." I closed my eyes and listened. "So," Harold Sterling said, "let's look at the brass tacks. You have the deed." "Locked and loaded," Harold said. "My son-in-law, bless his heart. He got the mother to sign the power of attorney. And the father, well, you saw him. He is a vegetable. He does not know what day of the week it is." Laughter. Cruel, mocking laughter. "So the collateral is the land?" Sterling asked. 5 acres of prime residential earth, Harold confirmed, appraised at $4 million as is. "Once we break ground on the luxury expansion, the projected value hits 10. "And the loan amount?" Sterling asked. $5 million, Harold said. "Cash, direct deposit into the holding company account on Tuesday morning." I frowned. $5 million? That was a lot of leverage for a renovation. Why did they need so much liquid cash? And the borrower entity? Sterling asked. "This is the beauty of it," Harold said, his voice dropping lower, conspiring. "The borrower is the Bishop Family Trust, with Marcus Bishop as the sole signatory guarantor." I gripped the phone. "Marcus." "They were putting the debt on Marcus." Sterling paused. "And you are sure the kid is good for it? I mean, if this goes south—" Harold interrupted him. "Listen, Bob, between you and me, this is not going north." "What do you mean?" Sterling asked. I held my breath in the dark pantry. Harold let out a puff of smoke. "Look, Bob, the market is soft. We know that. I am not building this resort to run it. I am building it to bleed it." My blood ran cold. "Here is the play," Harold continued. "We get the $5 million on Tuesday. By Friday, $4 million of that is transferred to offshore consultants for design fees and consulting services. Consultants that you and I own, Bob." "Kickbacks," I whispered to myself. "And the construction?" Sterling asked. "We dig a hole." Harold laughed. "We pour some concrete. We make a mess. And then, oops, we run into unforeseen geological issues. The project stalls, the money runs dry, the company declares bankruptcy, and the loan?" Sterling asked. "The loan defaults," Harold said. "The bank seizes the land. But since the land has been destroyed by a half-finished construction project, its value tanks. The bank writes it off. You get your commission, I get my consulting fees, and we walk away with $4 million of clean cash." I felt sick, physically sick. This was not just development, this was a bust-out, a classic mob tactic. They were going to gut the property, steal the loan money, and leave the carcass for the vultures. "But what about the kid?" Sterling asked. "What about Marcus? He is the guarantor." Harold chuckled. A dark, evil sound. "Marcus is the fall guy, Bob. He signed the papers. He is the CEO of the shell company. When the FBI comes looking for the missing millions, they are going to knock on his door, not mine." "But he is your son-in-law," Sterling said. "He is a useful idiot," Harold said. "Look at him. He thinks he is a tycoon. He thinks he is running the show. I just wind him up and point him in the right direction. When the dust settles, he will file personal bankruptcy. He will lose his credit. He might even do a year or 2 in minimum security for negligence. But hey, he is young. He will bounce back." "And the old folks?" Sterling asked. "Ray and his wife?" "Collateral damage," Harold said dismissively. "They lose the house, obviously. They end up in a state home. It is sad, sure. But that land is wasted on them. We are just accelerating the inevitable." I pulled the earbuds out of my ears. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. I sat there in the dark pantry surrounded by bags of flour and cans of soup. I stared at the wall. I had thought Marcus was a traitor. I had thought he was a greedy, ungrateful son who had turned on his father for money. But he was not. He was a victim too. He was a fool, yes. A weak, arrogant fool. But he was being played. He was being groomed for slaughter. Harold and Courtney were not just stealing my house. They were framing my son for a multi-million-dollar bank fraud. They were going to take the money, run to the Cayman Islands, and leave Marcus to rot in a federal prison cell. I remembered Marcus when he was a boy. I remembered teaching him how to ride a bike. I remembered how he used to cry when he hurt small animals. He was not a criminal. He was just desperate for approval. Desperate to be a big man like his father. And Harold had used that desperation to put a noose around his neck. I stood up. The anger I felt before was a candle flame. This was an inferno. I was not just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for my son's life. I opened the pantry door. Viola was waiting. She saw my face. "What is it, Ray?" she asked, alarmed. You look like you have seen a ghost." "I saw the devil, Viola," I whispered. I grabbed her arm. "We need to get this recording to Elijah," I said. "Now." "But the party," she said. "Forget the party," I said. I looked out into the kitchen. Marcus walked in. He was holding an empty glass, swaying slightly. He looked happy. He looked proud. "Hey, Dad," he slurred. "Great party, huh? Everyone is impressed. We are making big moves." I looked at him. I saw the target painted on his back. I saw the prison bars closing in around him. "Yes, son," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Big moves." I walked up to him. I put a hand on his shoulder. He flinched, surprised by the contact. "Marcus," I said, "do you trust Harold?" Marcus laughed, pushing my hand away. "Of course I trust him. He is family. He is helping us build an empire. You should be grateful." I looked into his eyes. They were glazed over with ambition and scotch. He could not see the cliff he was standing on. "Okay, Marcus," I said. "Just read the papers before you sign them on Tuesday." Marcus rolled his eyes. "I always read the papers, Dad. I am not you. I am a businessman." He turned and walked back toward the laughter, back toward the man who was planning to destroy him. I watched him go. "You are not a businessman, son," I thought. "You are the sacrifice." I turned to Viola. "Go back out there," I told her. "Keep smiling, keep serving. Do not let them suspect a thing." "Where are you going?" she asked. "I am going to the garage," I said. "I need to upload this file to the cloud securely, and then I'm going to make sure that when the FBI comes knocking, they have the right address." I walked out the back door into the cool night air. The music from the party thumped against the walls of the house. Harold thought he was the predator. He thought he was the shark. But he had forgotten one thing. Sharks swim in the water. And I control the drainage. On Monday, the water was going to run dry, and the shark was going to suffocate right there on the lawn. I looked up at the moon. It was full and bright. "Enjoy your cigar, Harold," I whispered. "It is going to be your last one as a free man." I pulled out my phone and hit send on the audio file. File sent evidence, 001.mp3 recipient, Elijah Gold, attorney at law. The trap was set. The bait was taken. Now all I had to do was wait for the snap. The party finally died down around midnight. The last of the luxury cars pulled out of the driveway, leaving behind the smell of exhaust and expensive perfume. I watched from the kitchen window as Harold and Sterling shook hands one last time under the porch light, sealing their deal with a laugh that sounded like dry leaves scraping on concrete. I was exhausted. My feet were throbbing in the tight dress shoes, and my back felt like someone had taken a hammer to my spine. I took off the ridiculous clip-on bow tie and threw it in the trash. I was ready to go down to the basement to collapse onto the sofa next to Viola, but Courtney had other plans. She walked into the kitchen holding a glass of wine. She looked at me with eyes that were glassy and cruel. "You are not done yet, Ray," she said, leaning against the doorframe. I looked at her. "I am tired, Courtney. Viola is already asleep." "I do not care," she snapped. "You tracked mud onto the carpet in the master bedroom earlier when you were moving boxes. I want it vacuumed, and I want the bathroom scrubbed. I am not waking up to a mess tomorrow." I looked at her hands. They were soft, manicured, useless. "You want me to clean your bedroom?" I asked slowly. "Yes," she said, taking a sip of wine. "And be quiet about it. Marcus is already passed out. Do not wake him." I could have refused. I could have told her to go to hell. But I remembered the plan. I remembered the long game. "Yes, Courtney," I said. "I will take care of it." "Good," she said, turning away. "When you are done, turn off the lights and stay in the basement until noon. We have a brunch meeting." I walked up the stairs to the master bedroom. My bedroom. The room where Viola and I had slept for 30 years before they moved in. Now it was painted a cold, sterile gray. The warm oak furniture was gone, replaced by sharp, modern angles and mirrors. Marcus was asleep on the bed, sprawled out on top of the covers, still wearing his tuxedo pants. He was snoring, mouth open, drooling slightly onto the pillow. He looked weak. Even in sleep, he looked like a man who was running from something. I got the vacuum, but I did not turn it on. I did not want to wake him. Instead, I picked up the broom and silently swept the carpet near the closet. That was when I saw it. The closet door was open. Inside, amidst the clutter of designer shoes and silk dresses, was the wall safe. I stopped sweeping. I knew that safe. I had bought it for Marcus 5 years ago as a housewarming gift when he bought his first condo. It was a heavy-duty titanium model, fireproof and waterproof. I had installed it for him myself. I looked at the keypad. It was blinking a soft red light. I wondered if he had changed the code. Marcus was lazy. He never changed the oil in his car. He never updated his passwords. I walked into the closet. I felt a strange gravitational pull toward that safe. It was not greed. It was instinct. The same instinct that told me when a storm was coming. I reached out and typed in the code I had set for him. 1975. The year I founded Bishop Construction. The light turned green. There was a soft mechanical click. I held my breath. He had never changed it. He was guarding his secrets with my legacy. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside there were stacks of cash, probably $10,000 wrapped in rubber bands. There were watches. There was a jewelry box. But I was not interested in the trinkets. My eyes went to a thick manila envelope sitting at the bottom. It was marked confidential, medical. I knew I should close the safe. I knew I had enough evidence with the recording I sent to Elijah, but something made me reach for that envelope. Maybe it was the way Courtney had looked at me earlier. Maybe it was the way she talked about the future. I picked up the envelope. It was not sealed. I opened it and pulled out the papers. It was a report from a fertility clinic in Buckhead, dated 4 years ago. I frowned. 4 years ago was when little Jackson was born. My grandson, the joy of my life. I started reading. The medical jargon was dense, but I understood enough. Patient Courtney Preston Bishop. Procedure in vitro fertilization. Donor ID 4492C. Donor. I froze. I flipped to the next page. It was a donor profile. Donor 4492C, ethnicity Caucasian, hair blonde, eyes blue, height 6'2", education PhD candidate, Yale University. I felt the room spin. I had to grab the shelf to keep from falling. Jackson, my grandson, the boy I had bounced on my knee, the boy I had taught to fish, the boy I had promised to leave this land to. He was not my blood. I looked over at the bed where Marcus was sleeping. Marcus, my son, he was black, I was black, Viola was black. Jackson had light skin. Everyone said he took after Courtney. Everyone said genes were funny things. I had believed it. I had wanted to believe it because I loved him so much, but it was a lie. I looked at the document again. There was a waiver attached, signed by Marcus. I, Marcus Bishop, acknowledge that I am not the biological father, consent to the use of donor material, agree to waive all parental rights in the event of divorce. He knew, my son knew, he had signed away his lineage. He had agreed to raise another man's child, a white man's child, and pass off the Bishop legacy to a stranger. Why? I looked at the date again. It was right before the wedding, right before Harold started investing in Marcus's business. It was a deal. Harold wanted a grandson who looked like him. Courtney wanted a baby with good genes from an Ivy League donor. And Marcus just wanted the money. He wanted the lifestyle. He was willing to erase his own bloodline to get it. I felt a tear run down my cheek. It was hot and angry. I looked at the photo of Jackson that was tucked into the back of the file. A beautiful smiling boy with curly hair and bright blue eyes. I still loved the boy. He was innocent in this. But the connection, the sacred bond of ancestry that I thought we shared, it was severed. The land, the house, the history of my family struggling up from the mud of the South to build something lasting. It ended with me. There was no heir. Marcus had not just sold the house. He had sold our future. He had sold our name. I looked at Marcus sleeping on the bed. For days I had felt a tiny spark of pity for him. I thought he was just weak. I thought he was being manipulated by his wife and father-in-law. I thought that maybe if I saved him, he could be redeemed. I thought that deep down, he was still a bishop. But a bishop does not sell his blood. I looked at the paper in my hand. It was not just a medical record. It was a receipt for a soul. The pity in my heart turned to ash. It crumbled and blew away, leaving only cold, hard granite. He was not my son anymore. He was just a man who lived in my house. A man who had conspired to erase me completely. I took my phone out of my pocket. I took a picture of every page, the donor profile, the waiver, the signature. This was the final nail. If they wanted to talk about family assets in court, Elijah would love to see this. If they wanted to claim they were acting in the best interest of the lineage, this would destroy them. But more than that, it freed me. I had been holding back. Deep down, I had been afraid that if I destroyed Marcus, I would be destroying my grandson's future. I had worried that if I bankrupt them, Jackson would suffer. But Jackson was a Preston. He had Harold's money. He had a Yale donor's genes. He would be fine. He did not need my land. And Marcus deserved nothing. I put the papers back in the envelope. I put the envelope back in the safe exactly where I found it. I closed the heavy steel door. Click. That click sounded like the hammer of a gun being cocked. I stood up. I looked at the vacuum cleaner. Clean the room, Courtney had said. I grabbed the vacuum. I wrapped the cord around the handle. I put it back in the closet. I am done cleaning up your messes, I whispered. I walked over to the bed. I stood over Marcus. I looked at his face one last time. I tried to find the little boy I used to know. The boy who cried when his goldfish died. He was gone. Sleep well, Marcus, I said softly. Dream about your millions. Dream about your country club. Because when you wake up, you are going to be an orphan. I turned off the light. I walked out of the room and closed the door. I walked down the hallway. The house was dark and silent. But for the first time in days, I did not feel the weight of it. I felt light. I felt unburdened. I was no longer a father trying to save a wayward son. I was a general fighting a war. And in war, you do not mourn the enemy. I walked down to the basement. Viola was asleep on the sofa. She looked peaceful. She did not know yet. She did not know that her grandmother dreams were a lie. I would have to tell her eventually, but not tonight. Tonight I would let her sleep. I sat down at my workbench. I pulled out the map of the property again. I picked up a red marker. I drew a big X over the backyard. Then I drew another X over the house. And then I drew a circle around the basement. This is the bunker, I thought. And tomorrow I launched the missiles. I looked at the phone. The photos were uploaded. Elijah had everything he needed. I leaned back in the chair and stared into the darkness. You wanted a legacy, Harold, I thought. You wanted to improve the bloodline, Courtney. And you wanted the easy way out, Marcus. Well, you got it. You erased the bishops. So do not be surprised when the bishops erase you. The sound of heavy machinery woke me up before the sun had fully risen. It was a deep, guttural rumble that vibrated through the concrete floor of the basement and rattled the teeth in my head. I lay there for a moment on the pull-out sofa, staring at the exposed pipes on the ceiling. To anyone else, that sound would have been annoying. To Harold and Courtney upstairs, it was probably the sound of progress, the sound of their swimming pool taking shape. But to me, it was the sound of the enemy walking right into the crosshairs. I sat up and swung my legs over the edge of the mattress. My joints popped and my back ached from another night on the thin springs, but I did not feel old today. I felt dangerous. I looked over at Viola. She was already awake, sitting at the small card table we had set up in the corner, clutching a mug of lukewarm coffee. Her eyes were wide with worry. "Do you hear that, Ray?" she whispered. "They are digging." I stood up and walked over to her. I placed a hand on her shoulder and felt the tension radiating off her. "Let them dig," I said calmly. "Every scoop of dirt they move is just another shovel full of evidence." I walked to the corner of the basement where my old filing cabinet stood. I did not need the blueprints today. Today, I needed the phone. I picked it up and dialed Elijah's private number. It rang once, twice. "Yeah," Elijah's voice answered, rough with sleep and cigarette smoke. "It is time," I said. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear the flick of a lighter and the sharp intake of breath. "Are you sure?" Ray Elijah asked. "Once we do this, there is no going back. This is the nuclear option." I looked at the ceiling. I could hear footsteps scurrying around upstairs. I could hear Courtney shouting orders to the construction crew. I imagined Marcus signing the loan papers that would enslave him to debt for the rest of his life. I am sure I said, "Activate Clause 19. Clause 19, Elijah repeated softly. The dead man's switch. He let out a low whistle. Your father was a paranoid son of a gun, Ray, but God bless him, he was a genius. My father, Jeremiah Bishop, was a man who learned the hard way that in this country a black man's property was never truly safe. He had lost his first farm in Alabama to a legal loophole back in the 50s. When he moved us here, when he bought this swampy piece of land that nobody else wanted, he swore that no bank and no lawyer would ever take it from us again. He wrote the will himself before he let a lawyer polish it, and he included Clause 19. I could see the words in my mind as clearly as if they were tattooed on my eyelids. The ownership of this land and all structures thereon shall remain in the Bishop bloodline in perpetuity. In the event that the primary heir is incapacitated, coerced, or forced to transfer title under duress, or if the line of succession is broken by non-biological issue, the title shall immediately and automatically revert to the Jeremiah Bishop Charitable Trust for Underprivileged Children. It was a poison pill, a fail-safe designed to burn the whole thing down rather than let an outsider steal it. And thanks to the papers I had found in the safe last night, the condition was met. Marcus had no biological children. The line of succession was broken. And thanks to the power of attorney, the transfer was clearly under duress. So the moment Elijah filed that motion, the moment he stamped that paper at the courthouse, which opened in exactly 20 minutes, this house would no longer belong to me. It would no longer belong to Marcus. And it certainly would not belong to Harold Preston. It would belong to the orphans of Atlanta. And everyone upstairs, including the construction crew digging up the yard, would be trespassing on charitable property. Do it, Elijah, I said. File it. And then call the sheriff. Tell them there is an active intrusion on trust property. I will call you when the stamp is dry, Elijah said. Give them hell, Ray. I hung up the phone. The silence in the basement felt heavy, charged with electricity. Viola looked at me. What did you do, Ray? I gave the house away, Viola, I said. She gasped. You what? I gave it to the children, I said. To the trust. It is the only way to save it from Harold. And it is the only way to save ourselves. I walked over to the large cedar wardrobe that stood in the back of the basement. It was wrapped in plastic to protect it from the dampness. I had moved it down here years ago when Courtney complained that it was too bulky for the guest room. I ripped the plastic open. The smell of cedar and mothballs wafted out. Inside, hanging in the dark, was my past. My work clothes were in the laundry basket. My gardener disguise was on the chair. But inside this wardrobe were the suits I used to wear when I was the man who built this town. I pushed aside the gray wool and the tweed. I was looking for one specific suit. There it was. The midnight blue three-piece bespoke suit I had worn 20 years ago. The night the Chamber of Commerce named me Businessman of the Year. I pulled it out. The fabric was still crisp. Italian wool, silk lining. It was a suit of armor. Where are you going? Viola asked, standing up. I am not going anywhere, I said, unbuttoning my flannel shirt. I am going upstairs. But Courtney said we have to stay down here until noon, she said. She said we cannot be seen by the crew. I threw the flannel shirt onto the floor. I kicked off the dirty work boots. Courtney does not give orders in this house anymore, I said. I put on the white dress shirt. It was a little tight around the neck, but I buttoned it all the way up. I put on the vest. I stepped into the trousers. I turned to the small mirror over the utility sink. I tied the silk tie. A full Windsor knot. Perfect symmetry. I looked at my reflection. The stooped old man was gone. The victim was gone. The gardener was gone. Staring back at me was Ray Bishop, CEO, founder, father. I put on the jacket. It settled onto my shoulders like a familiar weight. I shot my cuffs. I reached into the pocket and pulled out my grandfather's gold pocket watch. I checked the time, 8:15. The excavators would be positioning themselves over the drainage pipe right about now. I turned to Viola. She was staring at me with her hand over her mouth. Her eyes were shining. You look like yourself again, she whispered. I walked over to her. I kissed her gently on the forehead. Stay here, Viola, I said. Pack a bag. Just the essentials. Why, she asked, gripping my lapel. Because when this is over, I said we are going to take a long vacation. But first, I have some trash to take out. I walked toward the wooden stairs. The rumble of the machines was louder now. I could hear the beep, beep, beep of a bulldozer backing up. I could hear Harold shouting directions, trying to be the foreman. I started to climb. Every step was a memory. Step 1. Mixing concrete in the summer heat of 1970. Step 2. Signing the deed to the land in 1980. Step 3. Carrying Marcus through the front door when he was a baby. Step 4. Carrying Viola over the threshold. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I was not just angry. I was cold. I was a force of nature. I reached for the doorknob. Locked, of course. They had locked the basement door from the kitchen side. They wanted to keep the help out of sight while the big men did business. I smiled. I did not knock. I took a step back. I lifted my right leg, and I kicked the door right next to the latch. The wood splintered. The lock gave way with a loud crack. The door swung open, banging against the kitchen wall. The noise cut through the chatter in the kitchen like a gunshot. I stepped through the broken doorway. Harold was standing by the coffee machine holding a mug that said, "World's Best Grandpa." Marcus was eating a bagel. Courtney was looking at paint samples again. They all froze. They looked at the broken door. Then they looked at me. They did not see the old man in the dirty clothes. They saw the man in the midnight blue suit. They saw the man with the gold watch chain glinting in the light. They saw the man who had built the very floor they were standing on. Ray Harold stammered, dropping his spoon. "What the hell?" "You broke the door." I ignored him. I walked past him. I did not shuffle. My strides were long and purposeful. I walked straight to the back door that led to the yard. "Dad," Marcus called out, standing up, his mouth full of bagel. "Dad, what are you doing? You are not supposed to be up here. Go back downstairs." I stopped. I turned my head slowly to look at him. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. My voice was not loud, but it filled the room. It resonated off the walls. Marcus sat down. He did not know why, but he obeyed. It was the voice of his father. The voice he had feared and respected before. The money made him forget. I opened the back door. The bright morning sun hit me. The smell of diesel fumes was strong. There were two massive yellow excavators in my backyard. One was already digging its teeth into the turf near the creek. The other was positioning itself over the oak tree, over the culvert. I walked out onto the porch. I walked down the steps. I walked right into the middle of the yard. The foreman, a burly man in a hard hat, saw me. He saw the suit. He saw the way I walked. He waved his hand, and the machines stopped. The engines idled down to a low growl. Harold ran out onto the porch behind me. "Ray, get back inside," he screamed, his face turning purple. "You are embarrassing us. These men are working." I stopped. I stood on the grass. My shoes shined in the sun. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It vibrated. A text from Elijah. "It is done. The stamp is dry. Sheriff is en route." I smiled. I turned around to face the house. I looked at Harold. I looked at Courtney standing in the doorway clutching her pearls. I looked at Marcus peering out the window. I checked my watch again. "Get off my land," I said. Harold laughed. It was a nervous, hysterical laugh. "Your land. You senile old fool. It is Marcus's land. We have the papers." "No," I said. "You have a piece of paper that says you stole from a helpless old man. But you do not have the land." I pointed to the excavators. "Turn them off," I shouted to the foreman. The foreman looked at Harold, then at me. "Who is this guy?" the foreman yelled. "I am the owner," I said. "And you are trespassing on a federal wildlife preserve and a registered charitable trust." Harold ran down the steps. He looked like he was going to hit me. "Shut up, Ray," he shouted. "Just shut up." He turned to the foreman. "Ignore him. He has dementia. I am the project manager. Dig the hole." The foreman looked doubtful, but he revved the engine. The giant metal bucket lifted into the air, ready to strike the earth. I did not move. I stood right in the path of the machine. "If you dig," I said, my voice calm and deadly, "you will hit a limestone cavern, you will collapse the ground, and you will bury your machine and yourself in a sinkhole." The foreman hesitated. "Dig," Harold screamed. "I am paying you to dig." The bucket came down. It struck the earth. Crunch. The ground shook. But it was not the sound of dirt moving. It was the sound of something hollow breaking. A crack appeared in the grass. It started small, right near the wheel of the excavator. Then it zigzagged like lightning toward the house. "Stop!" I yelled. But it was too late. The arrogance of man had met the laws of nature, and nature was about to collect its debt. The evening air was thick with humidity and the smell of roasted lamb and arrogance. It was the night of the signing ceremony. After the incident with the excavator yesterday, Harold had gone into damage control mode. He had told the investors that I was a mentally unstable old man who had escaped his caregivers and that the crack in the ground was just a settling issue that had been resolved. He had spun a web of lies so thick you could walk on it. To prove that everything was under control, he had organized this emergency gala. He called it the Future of Bishop Estate Dinner. The goal was simple: get Mr. Sterling and the other investors drunk, get them happy, and get them to sign the $5 million loan release before the sun came up tomorrow. I stood in the utility room located just off the garage. It was a small concrete room that smelled of ozone and dust. This was the heart of the house. On the wall in front of me was the main breaker panel. It was a massive gray metal box that controlled every spark of electricity in the estate. I had installed it myself 20 years ago. I knew every circuit. I knew every fuse. I was no longer wearing the gardener's clothes. I was no longer wearing the servant's uniform. I was wearing the midnight blue bespoke suit I had pulled from the cedar wardrobe. It fit me like a second skin. The Italian wool settled onto my shoulders, giving me a posture I had not held in years. I checked my reflection in the small safety mirror on the wall. The stooped victim was gone. The coughing old man was gone. Staring back at me was Ray Bishop, the man who had built a dynasty from dirt. I checked my pocket watch. It was 9:15. Through the wall I could hear the muffled sounds of the party in the great hall. I heard the clinking of glasses. I heard the string quartet playing Mozart, and I heard Harold's voice booming over the microphone. He was making his toast. He was selling them the dream one last time. I reached out and placed my hand on the main throw switch. It was heavy. It was cold. Upstairs, Harold was probably raising his glass. He was probably looking at Marcus and winking, thinking they had pulled it off. He thought I was locked in the basement. He thought he had won. I took a deep breath. "Let there be darkness," I whispered. I pulled the lever down with a sharp metallic clank. The hum of the refrigerator died. The buzz of the overhead light vanished. The entire house plunged into absolute pitch-black silence. For a second, there was no sound at all. The music stopped abruptly as the musicians lost their light. Then came the chaos. I heard a collective gasp from 50 people. I heard the sound of expensive crystal shattering on the floor. I heard a woman scream, not in terror, but in the sudden indignation of being inconvenienced. "What is going on?" Harold's voice yelled out of the darkness. His voice cracked. He sounded terrified. I did not move. I waited. I knew the systems of this house better than I knew the lines on my own hand. I knew that the backup generator needed exactly 10 seconds to kick in. And I knew that I had wired the emergency circuit to power only one thing in the Great Hall: the stage lights. I opened the utility room door and stepped into the pitch-black hallway. I did not need to see. I had walked these floors for 40 years. I counted my steps. 1, 2, 3. I moved through the darkness like a panther. I could hear people bumping into each other. I could hear Marcus asking if anyone had a flashlight. 4, 5, 6. I reached the side entrance of the Great Hall. I slipped inside. The room was a cavern of confusion. The air was hot with the smell of panic. 7, 8, 9. I walked up the side steps of the stage. I stood right next to where I knew Harold was standing. I could hear his heavy breathing. I could smell the fear sweating out of his pores. 10. Thrum. The backup generator roared to life outside. The emergency floodlights mounted on the ceiling beam flickered once, twice, and then blasted on. They did not illuminate the crowd. They did not illuminate the bar. They were focused in a single tight beam directly on center stage. The light was blinding white. It cut through the darkness like a divine judgment. And standing in the center of that light was not Harold Preston. It was me. I stood tall, my spine straight as a steel girder. My suit absorbed the light, making me look like a shadow come to life. My gold watch chain glittered across my vest. My face was stone. Harold was standing a few feet away in the shadows, blinking like a rat caught in a flashlight beam. He looked disheveled. His tie was crooked. He held a microphone in a limp hand. The room went silent. The guests froze. They stared at the stage. They did not see the servant who had poured their drinks. They saw a king reclaiming his throne. I reached out and took the microphone from Harold's hand. He did not resist. He was too paralyzed by shock. I tapped the microphone once. Thump! The sound echoed through the silent hall, booming off the vaulted ceiling I had framed myself. I looked out at the crowd. I saw Mr. Sterling holding a pen hovering over a document. I saw Courtney clutching her chest, her face pale under her makeup. I saw Marcus looking at me with his mouth open. I waited. I let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable, until it was painful. I looked directly at Mr. Sterling. "I am sorry to interrupt this fraud," I said. My voice was deep, steady, and rich. It was the voice of a man who commanded construction crews over the roar of jackhammers. It was not the voice of a dementia patient. Harold stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Ladies and gentlemen," he stammered, his hands waving frantically, "please ignore this. This is my father-in-law. He is having an episode. He is confused. Security. Where is security?" "There is no security, Harold," I said into the microphone, drowning him out. "Because this is my house and I sent them home." I took a step towards the edge of the stage. The light followed me. "You are not having an episode," Ray Harold hissed at me away from the mic. "Get off this stage or I swear to God I will have you committed tonight." I turned and looked at him. I looked at him with such cold intensity that he actually took a step back. "You will do nothing, Harold," I said calmly, "because you have no power here, not anymore." I turned back to the crowd. "My name is Raymond Bishop," I said. "I built this house in 1981. I dug the foundation, I laid the brick, and I raised my family within these walls." I paused, scanning the faces of the investors. "You are here tonight to sign a deal for the Bishop Estate luxury redevelopment. You have been told that the land is stable, you have been told that the title is clear, and you have been told that I have voluntarily stepped down to let the next generation take over." I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket. Harold flinched, thinking I had a weapon. I pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the injunction Elijah had stamped this morning. I held it up in the harsh white light. "This," I said, "is a federal injunction filed at 8 a.m. this morning. It declares that as of today, the title to this land has reverted to the Jeremiah Bishop Charitable Trust." A murmur ran through the crowd. Mr. Sterling dropped his pen. "What does that mean?" Sterling called out, standing up. "It means," I said, smiling a cold, humorless smile, "that this house is now an orphanage. It means that the land you are standing on is protected property. And it means that the loan documents you are about to sign are worth less than the napkin you wiped your mouth with." Harold lunged for me. He tried to grab the microphone. "He is lying!" Harold screamed. "He is crazy. The papers are signed. We have the power of attorney." I simply sidestepped him. He stumbled and nearly fell off the stage. It was pathetic. I looked at Marcus. He was standing near the front row. He looked small. He looked like a child wearing a man's tuxedo. "Marcus," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, "step into the light." Marcus hesitated. Then slowly, like a sleepwalker, he walked toward the stage. "Tell them, Marcus," I said. "Tell them about the power of attorney." "Dad, please." Marcus whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "Don't do this. Tell them," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "Tell them how you told your mother I was in a coma. Tell them how you lied to a frightened woman to steal her signature." The crowd gasped. Heads turned toward Marcus. He shrank under the scrutiny. I thought it was for the best," Marcus stammered. "And the medical report," I asked. "The one in your safe. The one about my grandson." Marcus went white. He looked at Courtney. She was shaking her head violently, her eyes wide with panic. "Do not dare, Ray," she screamed from the floor. "That is private. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this," I roared. I held up the phone. I tapped the screen. The audio recording of Harold and Sterling's conversation began to play over the speakers. "The loan defaults. The bank seizes the land. You get your commission. I get my consulting fees. Marcus is the fall guy." Harold's voice boomed through the room, clear and undeniable. "He is a useful idiot. When the dust settles, he will file personal bankruptcy." The room went deathly silent. The only sound was the recording playing the confession of a conspiracy. Harold stood on stage, his face draining of all color. He looked at Sterling. Sterling looked at him with murder in his eyes. I turned off the recording. I looked at Marcus. "You sold your father for money," I said quietly, "and they sold you for spare parts." Marcus looked at Harold. The betrayal on his face was heartbreaking. But I did not have room for heartbreak tonight. I only had room for justice. I looked back at Mr. Sterling. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I believe you have a check for $5 million in your briefcase." Sterling nodded slowly. "I suggest you tear it up," I said, "unless you want to explain to the FBI why you were conspiring to defraud your own bank." Sterling did not hesitate. He opened his briefcase, took out a blue check, and ripped it into 4 pieces. He let the pieces fall to the floor. He looked at Harold. "You are done," Preston Sterling said. "If you ever come near my bank again, I will have the guards shoot you on sight." Harold was shaking. He looked around the room looking for an ally, but there were no allies. The guests were already moving toward the exits. The rats were fleeing the sinking ship. Ray Harold pleaded, his voice a whimper. "Ray, wait. We can work this out. It was just business. We can cut you in." I walked up to him. I towered over him. "Business?" I asked. I reached out and straightened his crooked tie. "You came into my house," I said. "You drank my wine. You made my wife kneel on the floor. And you tried to bury my son in debt." I leaned in close so only he could hear. "That is not business, Harold. That is suicide." I turned to the back of the room. Viola was standing there. She had her bag packed. She was watching me. She was smiling. I turned back to the microphone one last time. "The party is over," I announced. "You have 5 minutes to vacate the premises. After that, the sheriff arrives to arrest anyone trespassing on trust property." I dropped the microphone. Thud. It hit the floor with a sound of finality. I walked down the stairs of the stage. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I did not look left or right. I walked straight toward Viola. Behind me, I heard Harold shouting, blaming Marcus. I heard Courtney screaming at Harold. I heard the sound of a family devouring itself. But I did not look back. I reached Viola. I took her bag. I offered her my arm. "Shall we go, my dear?" I asked. She took my arm. Her grip was strong. "Yes, Ray," she said. "Let's go home." Oh. We walked out the front door, leaving the lights blazing on the empty stage, leaving the chaos behind us. The air outside was cool and fresh. I looked at the sky. It was clear. But I knew the storm had just begun for them. And for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to watching it rain. The recording continued to play over the speakers, filling the cavernous hall with the sound of Harold's betrayal. The voice was unmistakable. It was the same booming, arrogant baritone that had just delivered a toast to family values only minutes ago. But now, stripped of its public veneer, it sounded greasy and criminal. I stood on the stage holding the microphone to my phone like an executioner holding an axe. I watched the faces in the crowd. These were men and women who understood money. They understood greed, but they did not tolerate being played for fools. The recording crackled. "We default on the loan in 6 months, Harold's voice said on the tape. "We blame the soil conditions, we blame the drainage, the bank takes the loss, and Marcus signs the bankruptcy papers. The kid has no assets anyway. He is a clean skin. We burn his credit to save our cash." I looked at Marcus. He was standing near the front of the stage. His face was the color of old ash. He was staring at the speakers as if they were speaking in a foreign language. He could not process it. He could not believe that the man he worshipped, the man he called Dad, was plotting to send him to prison. I stopped the recording. The silence that followed was louder than the screaming had been. Harold broke it first. "It is a deep fake," he shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "That is AI generated. That is not me. This old man is sick. He is using technology to frame me." He looked around the room, searching for anyone to believe him. "Bob, tell them," Harold pleaded, looking at Mr. Sterling. "You know me. We play golf. You know I would never do that." Mr. Sterling stood up slowly. He picked up the pieces of the check he had torn up. He walked over to Harold. He did not look like a golf buddy. He looked like a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. "I know you," Harold Sterling said, his voice low and dangerous. "I know you are a liar, and I know that voice. You said those exact words to me 3 years ago on the Highland Park deal. I just did not know you were planning to pull the same scam on me." Sterling turned to his associates. "Pack up," he ordered. "We are leaving, and call legal. I want a freeze on all Preston assets by morning." "No," Harold screamed, grabbing Sterling's arm. "You cannot do that. We have a contract." Sterling shoved him away hard. Harold stumbled back, knocking over a tray of champagne glasses. They shattered around his feet like his future. "Get off me!" Sterling spat. I watched them. The rats were eating each other. But I was not done. I looked at Marcus. He was still standing there frozen. He looked at Harold, then he looked at me. "Dad," Marcus whispered. "Is it true?" I looked down at my son. I saw the pain in his eyes. It would have been easy to stop there. It would have been easy to let the financial ruin be the end of it. But I had to burn the bridge completely. I had to make sure he could never go back to them. I had to sever the cord that tied him to Courtney and her toxic family. I signaled to Elijah, who was standing by the projection system at the back of the room. Elijah nodded. "I have one more thing to show you," I said into the microphone. The large screen behind me, which had been displaying the architectural renderings of the new pool, flickered. The image changed. A collective gasp went through the room. It was not a blueprint. It was a medical document. It was the fertility clinic report, blown up to 10 feet tall. The words were legible even from the back of the room. Patient Courtney Preston Bishop. Donor profile 4492C, ethnicity Caucasian. Physical traits: blonde hair, blue eyes, occupation tennis instructor, Yale PhD candidate. I saw Courtney scream. It was a primal sound. She lunged toward the projector, trying to block the beam of light with her body, but the image just projected onto her white dress, branding her with her own secret. "Turn it off," she shrieked, clawing at the air. "Turn it off, you evil old man." I did not turn it off. I looked at Marcus. He was reading the screen. His lips were moving silently. I spoke into the microphone, my voice soft but unyielding. "Marcus," I said, "you wanted a legacy. You wanted to give the Bishop name to a grandson. You told me little Jackson had your grandmother's eyes." Marcus looked up at me. Tears were streaming down his face now. "But he does not have my mother's eyes, Marcus," I said. "He has the eyes of the man Courtney was taking private lessons from at the club." "That is a lie," Courtney screamed. She ran toward Marcus, grabbing his lapels. "Do not listen to him, baby. He is lying. We chose a donor together, remember?" We agreed. Marcus pushed her away. He looked at her with horror. "We chose a donor," he said, his voice shaking. "Yes, because you told me my count was low. You told me we needed help. But you said the donor was anonymous. You said he was like me." Courtney froze. "I chose the best." Courtney spat, her mask finally slipping completely. "I chose a donor with good genes, Marcus. A donor with a future. A donor with a PhD. Not some construction worker bloodline." The room went dead silent. There it was. The racism. The elitism. The hatred she had hidden behind a smile for 5 years. She covered her mouth, realizing what she had said. "But words are like bullets. Once they leave the barrel, you cannot call them back." Marcus stepped back as if she had slapped him. He looked at the screen again. "Tennis instructor." He looked at Harold. "You knew?" Marcus asked. Harold wiped sweat from his forehead. He shrugged, a gesture of complete indifference. "Does it matter who the sire is?" Harold said. "The kid is healthy. He is white. He is bright. He has a future. You are his father on paper, Marcus. Grow up. That is how the world works. We upgraded the stock." Upgraded. I felt a fire in my chest. They talked about my grandson like he was cattle. Like he was a product. I gripped the microphone. "You did not upgrade anything," I said, my voice booming. "You erased him. You erased my son. And you erased me." I walked to the edge of the stage. "Marcus," I said, "look at them. Look at the people you sold your soul for. They do not love you. They do not respect you. To them, you are just a signature. You are just a bank account they can drain and a name they can use to hide their sins." Marcus looked at his wife. He looked at his father-in-law. He saw them clearly for the first time. He saw the ugliness beneath the expensive clothes. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out the debit card. My debit card. The one he had taken from me yesterday. He looked at it. Then he looked at Courtney. He threw the card at her feet. "I am done," Marcus said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "What did you say?" Courtney hissed. "I said I am done," Marcus repeated louder. "I am done being your puppet. I am done being your fool. And I am done being your husband. You cannot leave me." Courtney laughed nervously. "You have nothing, Marcus. We own you. We own the house. We own the company." "No," I interrupted. You own nothing. I pointed to the screen where the injunction was still visible in the corner. The house belongs to the trust, I said. The company accounts have been frozen by Mr. Sterling. And the loan, well, the loan is dead. I looked at Harold. You are broke, Harold, I said. And come Monday morning when the SEC investigates that recording, you will be in handcuffs. Harold looked around wildly. He realized the walls were closing in. He ran. He actually ran. The big man who wanted to build an empire scrambled off the stage and bolted for the side exit, knocking over chairs in his panic. Courtney watched him go, her father, her hero, abandoning her. She looked at Marcus. Baby, she pleaded, changing her tune instantly. We can fix this. We can explain. Marcus looked at her with dead eyes. Don't call me baby, he said. He turned his back on her. He walked toward the stage. He walked toward me. He stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked up. He looked like a little boy again. A little boy who had fallen off his bike and scraped his knees raw. Dad, he whispered. I looked down at him. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to pull him up onto the stage and shield him from the pain. But I knew I couldn't. Not yet. He had to stand on his own 2 feet. He had to feel the weight of his mistakes. I did not reach down. I stood tall. You have a long walk ahead of you, son, I said. I turned away from him. I looked out at the empty room. The guests were gone. The waiters were gone. Only the debris remained. Broken glass, spilled wine, and a shattered family. I walked over to the projector. I pulled the plug. The screen went dark. The evidence vanished. But the truth remained. I stepped off the stage. Viola was waiting for me by the door. She had watched the whole thing. She was crying silent tears. I walked over to her. Is it over? She asked. The lie is over, I said. Now the hard part begins. We walked out into the night, leaving Marcus standing alone in the dark ballroom, surrounded by the ruins of the life he thought he wanted. I knew he would survive. He was a bishop after all. We are built to survive. But tonight he had to learn the hardest lesson of all. You cannot build a house on sand, and you certainly cannot build a family on a lie. As we walked to my truck, I heard a siren in the distance. It was getting closer. Justice, I thought, was finally coming to dinner. The ballroom was silent, but the air was screaming. The guests had fled the scene like rats sensing a rising tide, leaving behind a wasteland of overturned chairs and shattered glass. But the Prestons were still there. They were trapped in the wreckage of their own ego. Harold had been stopped at the side exit by the locked doors I had secured earlier. He was pounding on the wood like a trapped animal. Marcus was sitting on the edge of the stage, his head in his hands, broken and silent. But Courtney was different. She was not running and she was not grieving. She was vibrating with a rage so pure and so hot, it distorted her face into something unrecognizable. She stood in the center of the room, her white dress stained with wine, her hair coming loose from its pins. She looked at Marcus, who had just rejected her. Then she looked at her father, who was cowering by the door. And then she looked at me. Her eyes locked onto mine, and I saw the moment her sanity snapped. She did not see a father-in-law. She did not see an elderly man. She saw the architect of her destruction. She saw the man who had taken her perfect life and smashed it into a million pieces. You, she screamed. It was a sound that tore at her throat. You did this, you jealous, spiteful old man. She kicked off her high heels. She did not care about dignity anymore. She wanted blood. You ruined my life, she shrieked, running toward the stage. You ruined my marriage. You ruined everything. She moved faster than I expected. She scrambled up the stairs, her nails clawing at the air. She was aiming for the microphone. She wanted to throw it. She wanted to use it as a weapon. Or maybe she just wanted to tear my eyes out. I braced myself. I was 72 years old. I was strong, but she was young and fueled by the adrenaline of a psychopath. I prepared to catch her wrists. I prepared to defend myself against the woman I had once welcomed into my family. But I never got the chance. A blur of movement flashed from my left side. It was not a security guard. It was not a police officer. It was Viola, my wife, the woman who had spent 40 years speaking in soft tones, the woman who had knelt on the floor to wipe a stranger's shoe just an hour ago, the woman who hated conflict more than anything in the world. She stepped between me and Courtney with the speed of a lioness protecting her mate. Courtney reached out her hand, curled into a claw, reaching for my face. Whack! The sound was louder than the microphone drop. It was the sound of flesh hitting flesh with the weight of decades of suppressed anger behind it. Viola had slapped her. She did not slap her like a grandmother scolding a child. She slapped her like a warrior. She put her entire hip into it. Her hand connected with Courtney's cheek with such force that Courtney spun around and fell hard onto the stage floor. Courtney lay there stunned. Her hand flew to her cheek, which was already turning a bright, angry red. She looked up at Viola with wide, shocked eyes. She had never seen this woman before. She had only seen the maid, the victim, the pushover. Viola stood over her. She was breathing hard, her chest heaving. She smoothed her skirt. She looked 10 feet tall. "Do not you dare," Viola said, her voice low and dangerous like a growl. "Do not you dare touch my husband." Courtney opened her mouth to speak, to spit some venom, but Viola took a step forward and Courtney flinched, dragging herself backward across the floor. "You come into my house," Viola continued, her voice rising with every word filling the empty hall. "You treat me like a servant. You treat my son like a fool, and you treat my husband like a dog." I stayed quiet for Marcus. I stayed quiet for peace. But the peace is over, Courtney. If you ever raise a hand to Ray again, I will forget that I am a Christian woman, and I will show you exactly where Ray gets his strength from. I looked at my wife, and my heart swelled with a pride so fierce it almost brought me to tears. She had found her voice. The Prestons had tried to break her, but they had only forged her into steel. Courtney started to sob. Not tears of remorse, but tears of humiliation. She looked around for help. "Daddy," she wailed. "Daddy, do something." But Daddy could not do anything, because at that moment, the double doors at the main entrance burst open. The blue lights from outside flooded the room, mixing with the white stage lights, creating a surreal nightmare for the Prestons. Elijah walked in first. He was wearing his trench coat, his battered briefcase in hand. He looked like the grim reaper of the legal world. Behind him walked Sheriff Miller, a man I had known since high school, and flanking him were 2 deputies. But it was the man in the charcoal suit walking next to Elijah who sealed their fate. It was not Mr. Sterling. It was Mr. Henderson, the vice president of risk management from the bank, the man who handled fraud. Elijah walked straight to the stage. He looked at Courtney crying on the floor. He looked at me. He nodded once. "Ray," Elijah said, "looks like we made it just in time." He turned to the sheriff. "Sheriff Miller," Elijah said, pointing to Harold, who was still trying to pry open the side door. "That man is Harold Preston. He is currently trespassing on property owned by the Jeremiah Bishop Charitable Trust, and I believe there is a warrant for his arrest regarding the attempted illegal excavation of protected wetlands." Harold froze. He turned around slowly. "Sheriff, wait," Harold stammered, putting his hands up. "It is a misunderstanding. I am a developer. I have permits." "You have a fake permit," Harold, Sheriff Miller said, his voice booming. "We checked with the county clerk this morning. Your expedited paperwork was never filed. You dug on protected land without authorization. That is a felony." The deputies moved in. They grabbed Harold's arms. He struggled for a second, indignity etched on his sweaty face, but the click of the handcuffs silenced him. "I am not a criminal," Harold shouted as they dragged him toward the exit. "I am a businessman. Ask the bank. Ask Sterling. I have credit." "Mr. Henderson." The man in the charcoal suit stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Harold with the cold detachment of an auditor. "Actually, Mr. Preston Henderson," said, his voice dry and sharp. "You do not have credit." Harold stopped struggling. "What?" Mr. Henderson opened a folder he was carrying. "After receiving Mr. Bishop's audio evidence regarding your intent to defraud our institution, we launched an immediate audit of your existing accounts," Henderson explained. "It seems your liquidity was exaggerated. You have been leveraging the same assets across multiple banks. It is a classic Ponzi scheme structure." Harold went pale. So Henderson continued closing the folder. "As of 10 minutes ago, the bank has exercised its right to call in all outstanding debts immediately. Your personal accounts, your business accounts, and your daughter's accounts." Courtney stopped crying. She sat up on the floor. "My accounts," she whispered. Henderson looked at her. "You are listed as a partner in Preston Development, Mrs. Bishop," he said. "Your assets are frozen pending the federal investigation. Your credit cards have been canceled. Your car has been flagged for repossession, and the lien on your condo has been activated." Courtney stared at him. "But I have nothing," she breathed. Henderson shrugged. "You have nothing now, ma'am," he said. "In fact, you have less than nothing. You have significant debt." The silence that followed was heavy. The Prestons were not just defeated, they were erased. Their power, their arrogance, their threats, it all came from money. And with a few keystrokes and a recording that money had evaporated. I looked at Harold. He was sagging in the deputy's grip. He looked old. He looked like the con man he truly was. "Ray," he croaked, looking at me with desperate eyes. "Ray, please." "The bail. I cannot go to jail, Ray. I have a heart condition. Help me. Put up the land for my bail." I stood on the edge of the stage. I looked down at him. I remembered the way he had laughed when he sent me to mow the lawn. I remembered the way he had planned to send my son to prison. "My land belongs to the orphans, Harold," I said calmly. "And they do not bail out criminals." "Take him away, Sheriff," I said. The deputies dragged him out. His expensive shoes dragged across the floor, leaving scuff marks that would be the only legacy he left in this house. Courtney was still sitting on the floor. She looked at her hands. She looked at her dress. She looked at Marcus. "Marcus," she whispered, "help me. We can fight this. My dad, he made mistakes, but we are a team." Marcus stood up from the edge of the stage. He walked over to her. He looked down at his wife. He reached into his pocket. He pulled out his car keys, the keys to the luxury SUV that Harold had leased for him. He dropped the keys on the floor next to her. "They are going to repossess it anyway," Marcus said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You might as well give it to them now." Marcus Courtney sobbed, reaching for his leg. "Where will I go? I have no money. I have no home." Marcus stepped back, avoiding her touch. "You have a PhD candidate in Connecticut," Marcus said. "Go ask him for help. Maybe he has room in his dorm." He turned away from her. He walked over to me and Viola. He looked at his mother. He saw the fire in her eyes that was just starting to fade back into kindness. "Mom," he said, his voice cracking. "Dad." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Not here, son," I said. "Not now." Elijah walked up to us. He was smiling a tired, victorious smile. "The injunction is permanent," Ray Elijah said. "The trust is active, the house is secure, and the environmental charges will keep Harold tied up in court for the next 10 years. "Thank you, Elijah," I said, shaking his hand. Henderson, the bank rep, cleared his throat. "Mr. Bishop," he said, looking at me with new respect. "We apologize for the oversight. The bank had no idea the loan was predatory. We will be conducting a full internal review." "You do that," I said. "And make sure you check Mr. Sterling's emails while you are at it." Henderson nodded and walked away. I looked around the room. It was over. The empire of lies had collapsed. Courtney was still weeping on the floor, a fallen queen with no kingdom. Sheriff Miller walked back in. "Ray," he said, "do you want us to remove the woman too?" I looked at Courtney. "Yes," I said. "She is trespassing." Two deputies walked over and gently but firmly lifted Courtney to her feet. She did not fight. She was too broken. She let them lead her out. As she passed me, she did not look up. She stared at the floor, her spirit crushed under the weight of her own greed. When the doors closed behind her, the silence in the room finally felt clean. It was just me, Viola, Marcus, and Elijah, the family, or what was left of it. Viola took my hand. "Ray," she said softly, "we did it." I looked at the empty stage. I looked at the dark corners of the hall. "We did not just win, Viola," I said. "We survived." I turned to Marcus. He was trembling. "Come on," I said. "Let's go downstairs. The basement is not much, but it is safer than this place." "We do not have to sleep in the basement anymore, Dad," Marcus said, wiping his eyes. "It is your house." "No, son," I said, looking at the grand chandelier. "It is the children's house now. We are just the caretakers. And that is exactly how I wanted it." I walked toward the exit, my arm around my wife, my son following behind. The dominoes had fallen exactly as I had planned. And for the first time in months, I could breathe. The ballroom was empty now, save for the four of us standing in the wreckage of what was supposed to be the social event of the season. The silence was heavy and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that sounded like a funeral dirge. Marcus stood alone in the center of the dance floor. He looked like a man who had survived a plane crash only to realize he was stranded on a desert island. His tuxedo was rumpled, his tie was loose, and his face was a mask of absolute shock. He looked at the door where the police had dragged Harold away. He looked at the spot where Courtney had been weeping on the floor. And then he looked at me. He took a deep breath and straightened his spine. It was a reflex, a muscle memory of the arrogance he had worn like armor for the last 5 years. He wiped his face with a trembling hand and tried to salvage the only thing he thought he had left. "Fine," Marcus said, his voice hollow and scraping against the silence. "Fine. You took the house, Dad. You put Harold in jail. You destroyed my marriage. I hope you are happy." I looked at him calmly. "I am not happy, Marcus," I said. "I am just finished." Marcus laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You think you have won it all," he said, stepping forward. "You think you left me with nothing. But you forgot one thing, Dad. You forgot the company." He pointed a finger at me, trying to regain some semblance of power. "I signed the transfer papers last week," he said, his voice rising. "Before the power of attorney. Before the drama. I legally own Bishop Construction. I am the CEO. I control the accounts. I control the contracts. And on Monday morning, I am going to fire every single person who is loyal to you. I am going to sell the equipment. I am going to liquidate the assets. And I am going to use that money to fight you for this house until the day I die." He was panting now, fueled by spite. "You might have the land, Ray, but I have the machine," he spat. "I have the business you spent 40 years building, and I am going to burn it to the ground just to spite you." I looked at Elijah. Elijah looked back at me and adjusted his glasses. He did not smile. He did not frown. He just opened his briefcase and pulled out a single thin file. I looked back at Marcus. I felt a deep, profound sadness. He really did not understand who he was dealing with. He thought business was just signatures and bank accounts. He did not understand that business was people. "Marcus," I said softly, "do you remember when you were 10 years old and you wanted to drive the bulldozer?" Marcus blinked, confused by the question. "What?" "You wanted to drive the big yellow cat," I continued. "You cried and screamed until I let you sit in the cab. You grabbed the levers, you made the engine roar. You thought you were driving." I took a step closer to him. "But you were not driving, son. I had the kill switch in my hand the whole time. You were just making noise." Marcus sneered. "I am not 10 years old anymore, and you do not have a kill switch. I own the corporation. It is filed with the Secretary of State." I nodded. "You are right. You own the corporation. You own the legal entity known as Bishop Construction LLC. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But tell me, Marcus, when was the last time you went to the equipment yard?" Marcus hesitated. I have been busy. Courtney and I were planning the development. I haven't been there in a few months." "So what? And when was the last time you spoke to the foreman, Big Mike?" I asked. Marcus shrugged. "I don't know. Last week, maybe. I sent him an email about the schedule." "And did he reply?" I asked. Marcus frowned. "No, he didn't. He is lazy. I was going to fire him anyway." I shook my head slowly. "He is not lazy, Marcus. He is loyal. And he did not reply because he does not work for you." "What are you talking about?" Marcus demanded. "He has worked for Bishop Construction for 20 years. He worked for me," I corrected. I signaled to Elijah. He handed me the file. I walked over to Marcus and held it out. 6 months ago," I said. 6 months ago, when Courtney started talking about putting your mother in a home. When you started missing Sunday dinners to go to meetings with Harold. When I saw you looking at me not as a father but as an obstacle. I watched his eyes as I spoke. I saw the writing on the wall, Marcus. I knew you were coming for me. I just didn't know when. So I did what any good engineer does. I reinforced the structure. I opened the file. 6 months ago, I incorporated a new company," I said. "It is called Viola Holdings." Marcus looked at the paper. It was a certificate of incorporation, so what, he scoffed. "You made a new company? Good for you. Bishop Construction is still the big dog. We have the trucks, we have the mixers, we have the excavators. That is millions of dollars in iron, Dad." "No," I said. "You have nothing." I flipped the page. It was a bill of sale, dated 5 months ago. Bishop Construction sold its entire fleet of vehicles and heavy machinery to Viola Holdings for the fair market value of $1, I explained. $1, Marcus shouted. "That is illegal. You cannot do that." "I can," I said calmly. "Because at the time I was the sole owner. I sold the assets to pay off a promissory note. It is all legal." Elijah made sure of it. I flipped another page. "And the contracts," I said. "All those city contracts you think you have. The road work on I-85, the new library foundation." I pointed to a clause. They all had a key man clause, Marcus. It means if Ray Bishop is not the primary operator, the contracts are void. When you took over last week, the contracts automatically terminated. And do you know who picked them up the next day? Marcus stared at me, his mouth open. Viola Holdings, I whispered. And the men, I continued, relentless now. Big Mike, the concrete crew, the framers, the men who actually know how to build. They all resigned from Bishop Construction on Friday. They signed new employment agreements with Viola Holdings this morning. They are not coming to your yard on Monday, Marcus. They are coming to mine. Marcus staggered back. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. So I have nothing, he whispered. Not exactly, I said, closing the file. I handed the file to him. He took it with limp hands. You have the name, I said. You have the logo. You have the office lease, which, by the way, is 3 months behind on rent. I paused. I was about to deliver the final blow. The payload. And you have one more thing. Marcus looked up. Fear was replacing the anger in his eyes. What he asked, his voice trembling. I reached into my pocket and pulled out an envelope. It was not from a lawyer. It was from the IRS. I handed it to him. You see, Marcus, I said, when I transferred the assets, I had to balance the books. Bishop Construction had a very profitable year last year, but I decided to delay the tax payment. I wanted to keep the cash flow liquid for the new company. Marcus opened the envelope. His hands shook so hard the paper rattled. He stared at the number. $212,000, plus penalties and interest, due immediately. I watched the color drain from his face until he looked like a ghost. You didn't pay the corporate taxes? He stammered. I forgot, I said, shrugging. Old age, you know. I get confused. But this is addressed to the CEO, Marcus said. Exactly, I said. And as of last week, when you signed those papers with Harold, you are the CEO. You signed an assumption of liability, Marcus. You wanted the title. You wanted the power. Well, the power comes with a price tag. Marcus dropped the letter. It fluttered to the floor, landing next to the broken glass. $200,000, he whispered. I don't have $200,000. You froze my accounts. I know, I said. And the company accounts, Marcus asked, desperate now. Empty, I said. I transferred the cash reserves to Viola Holdings as a consulting fee for management services. Marcus fell to his knees. He did not collapse gracefully. He just crumpled. He sat on the dirty floor in his ruined tuxedo, surrounded by the wreckage of his life. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw the full weight of reality crushing him. You planned this, he said. You planned this whole thing. You let me steal an empty shell. You let me sign my life away for a debt I cannot pay. I looked down at him. I did not plan for you to betray me, Marcus, I said. I planned for a rainy day. You just happened to be the storm. But why? Marcus cried. Why would you do this to me? I am your son. Because you are my son, I said, my voice breaking for the first time. Because I love you enough to teach you the lesson you refused to learn. I knelt down so I was eye level with him. You thought you could take what you did not build, Marcus. You thought you could inherit respect. You thought you could steal a legacy. But a legacy isn't concrete and steel. It isn't a bank account. It is character. And until you build some character, you will never own anything of value. I stood up. The IRS does not play games, Marcus. You have 30 days to pay that bill. If you don't, they will seize your personal assets, your car, your clothes, your condo. But I have nothing left, he sobbed. Courtney is gone. The house is gone. The money is gone. Then you better start working, I said. I pointed to the door. I hear Viola Holdings is hiring laborers, I said. Minimum wage. Hard work, digging ditches. It is not glamorous, Marcus, but it is honest. And if you show up on Monday morning at 6 a.m. sharp, Big Mike might give you a shovel. Marcus stared at me. He looked at the floor. He looked at his soft hands. You want me to dig ditches, he whispered. I want you to build a man, I said, and you start at the bottom, just like I did. I turned away from him. Viola was waiting by the exit. She had heard everything. She did not look happy. A mother is never happy to see her child suffer. But she looked resolved. She knew it was necessary. Come on, Ray, she said softly. Let's go home. I walked over to her. Elijah packed up his briefcase and followed us. We walked out of the ballroom. At the door, I stopped and looked back one last time. Marcus was sitting alone in the spotlight. He was holding the IRS letter in one hand and the useless bill of sale in the other. He looked small. He looked terrified. But for the first time in his life, he was holding the truth. The company was a shell. The marriage was a lie. The friendship with Harold was a scam. All he had left was the debt. "Good luck, Marcus," I whispered. I pushed the heavy doors open and walked out into the cool night air. The stars were shining above the city of Atlanta. Somewhere out there in the darkness, my excavators were parked safe and sound in a new yard ready to build a new future. I took Viola's hand. "You know," I said as we walked to the truck. What she asked. "I think I might retire for real this time," I said. Viola laughed, a warm, genuine sound that washed away the ugliness of the night. "You will never retire, Ray Bishop," she said. "You will be building something until the day you die." "Maybe," I said, smiling. "But from now on, I am only building for us." I started the engine of the old truck. It roared to life, strong and reliable. We drove away, leaving the empty shell of Bishop Construction behind us in the rearview mirror. It was just a name now, a ghost. But we were alive, and we were free. The sound of the handcuffs clicking on Harold's wrists had faded, but the echo remained in the silent ballroom. The party was over. The guests had fled like rats from a sinking ship, leaving behind half-eaten canapes and spilled wine that looked like blood on the polished oak floor. The only people left were the law and the family, or what used to be a family. Sheriff Miller walked back into the room. He was a big man with a face carved out of granite and eyes that had seen too much trouble in this county to be surprised by anything. He adjusted his belt and looked at Marcus, who was standing alone in the middle of the dance floor. Marcus looked like a ghost in his tuxedo. His tie was undone, hanging around his neck like a noose he had forgotten to tighten. His face was pale and slick with sweat. He was shivering even though the room was warm. "It is time to go," Marcus the sheriff said, his voice flat and professional. Marcus blinked slowly as if he were waking up from a nightmare. He looked around the empty room. He looked at the crystal chandelier that I had installed 30 years ago. He looked at the grand staircase where he had taken his prom photos. He looked at the walls that had sheltered him his entire life. "Go where?" Marcus whispered, his voice cracking. "This is my home." "Not anymore," the sheriff said, stepping closer. "As of 8 o'clock this morning, this property belongs to the Jeremiah Bishop Charitable Trust. You are not a trustee, you are not an employee, and you are certainly not a resident." The sheriff pointed to the open double doors where the night air was drifting in cool and indifferent. "You are trespassing on private property, Marcus. I have orders to clear the building. That includes you." Marcus looked at me. He looked at his father. For years he had looked at me with contempt. He had looked at me as an obstacle, as an old man who was in the way of his inheritance. But now, stripped of his wife, stripped of his money, and stripped of his arrogance, he looked at me with the desperate eyes of a frightened child. He took a step toward me, then another. He started to run. He crossed the distance between us and fell to his knees. He hit the floor hard. The sound of his knees hitting the wood made me flinch, but I did not move away. He grabbed my hand. His palms were clammy. He buried his face in my jacket, the expensive wool soaking up his tears. "Dad, please," he sobbed. "You cannot do this. You cannot kick me out. I have nowhere to go. Courtney is gone. Harold is going to jail. I have no money. I have no car." I looked down at the top of his head. I remembered when he was 5 years old and he had fallen off his bike in the driveway. He had run to me then too, crying about a scraped knee. I had picked him up. I had wiped his tears. I had told him that everything would be all right because Daddy was there. But he was not 5 years old anymore. He was 35. And the wounds he had were self-inflicted. I did not pull my hand away, but I did not comfort him. I let him cry. I let him feel the cold reality of the floor beneath his knees. "Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but steady, "look at me." He lifted his head. His eyes were red and swollen. His nose was running. He looked pathetic. He looked broken. "I am sorry, Dad." He wept. "I am so sorry. I did not mean for it to go this far. I just wanted to be successful. I wanted you to be proud of me." Harold said he could help me build something. He said we could make the Bishop name famous. "Famous," I repeated. "You wanted to be famous, so you sold your soul to a con man. You lied to your mother. You forged documents. You planned to put us in a nursing home and bulldoze the house we built with our own hands. I did it for us," Marcus pleaded, tightening his grip on my hand. I thought if I had the money I could take care of you better. I swear, Dad, I was going to pay you back. Once the resort was built, I was going to give you everything." I looked at Viola. She was standing a few feet away. Her face was unreadable. She was watching her son beg. Every mother wants to save her child. I knew every instinct in her body was screaming at her to rush forward, to pull him up, to hold him close. But she did not move. She stood her ground. She remembered the way Courtney had snapped at her. She remembered the way Marcus had stood by and watched while she was treated like a servant in her own kitchen. I pulled my hand away from Marcus's grip. He reached for me again, but I took a step back. "You were not going to give us everything, Marcus," I said. "You were going to give us charity, and there is a big difference." I pointed to the spot on the floor where Viola had knelt earlier that evening to wipe the shoe of the rude guest. "Do you see that spot, Marcus?" I asked. He looked at the floor, confused. "That is where your mother knelt," I said, my voice hardening. "That is where she lowered herself to clean the dirt off a stranger's shoe because she was trying to protect you. She was trying to play the role you forced her into. She swallowed her pride. She swallowed her dignity. Just so you could have your party. Just so you could play the big shot." I felt the anger rising in my chest again, not the hot, explosive anger of before, but a cold, heavy weight. "I can forgive the money, Marcus. Money is just paper. I can make more. I can forgive the house. It is just wood and brick. If you had burned it down by accident, I would have rebuilt it." I leaned down, getting close to his face. "But I will never forgive you for what you did to her." Marcus flinched as if I had struck him. "You let them humiliate her," I whispered. "You stood there in your tuxedo drinking my wine, and you watched your wife and her father treat your mother like a maid. You watched them laugh at her. You watched them order her around. And you said nothing." I stood up straight, towering over him. "You are not a man, Marcus. A man protects his family. A man protects the woman who gave him life. You traded her dignity for a swimming pool. You traded her respect for a loan approval." "Dad, please," Marcus wailed, reaching for my leg again. "I was scared. I was weak." "Yes," I said, "you were weak, and you are still weak. Look at you, kneeling on the floor begging your father to fix your mess. You want me to wave a magic wand. You want me to write a check. You want me to make the bad men go away." I shook my head slowly. "I cannot fix this for you, son. If I fix this, you will never learn. You will spend the rest of your life looking for the next herald to tell you what to do. You will spend the rest of your life being a victim." Sheriff Miller stepped forward. He put a hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Come on, son," the sheriff said, not unkindly. "Do not make me drag you out." Marcus shook the sheriff off. He looked at Viola. "Mom," he cried. "Mom, help me. Talk to him." Viola took a deep breath. She walked over to him. She looked down at her son. Her eyes were filled with tears, but her jaw was set. "Stand up, Marcus," she said softly. He looked at her, hope flickering in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "Stand up," she repeated, her voice stronger. "Do not kneel to anyone, not even your father." Marcus slowly climbed to his feet. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He stood there, shoulders slumped, defeated. "I love you, Marcus," Viola said. "I will always love you. You are my son." "Then let me stay," he begged. "Please, Mom, just for a few nights, until I figure things out." Viola shook her head. "If I let you stay, you will never figure things out," she said. "You will hide here. You will wait for the storm to pass. And you will never grow up." She reached out and touched his cheek. "Your father is right," she said. "You let them break us, and you helped them holding the hammer. I can forgive you, Marcus, but I cannot live with you. Not now. Not until you learn what it means to be a bishop." She stepped back, standing next to me. We were a united front, a wall he could not breach. I looked at my son one last time. "The IRS bill is in your pocket," I said. "The lawsuit from the bank is coming on Monday. You have a lot of work to do." "But where do I go?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper. I walked over to the door and held it open. "Go out there," I said, pointing to the darkness. "Go into the world. Get a job. A real job. Use your hands. Sweat. Bleed. Learn what $1 actually costs." I looked him in the eye. "Stand up and walk out that door, Marcus. Walk out there and live like a man for the first time in your life. Stop being a son. Stop being a husband, just be a man." Marcus stared at me for a long moment. He saw that there was no mercy coming. He saw that the bank of Daddy was closed forever. He took a deep breath. He straightened his jacket. He tried to fix his tie, but his hands were shaking too much, so he ripped it off and threw it on the floor. He nodded once, a jerky, painful nod. "Goodbye, Dad," he said. "Goodbye, Mom." He turned and walked toward the door. He passed the sheriff. He walked out onto the porch. He walked down the steps past the spot where the excavator had cracked the earth. I watched him go. He walked down the long driveway, his tuxedo shoes crunching on the gravel. He did not look back. He walked past the gate and turned onto the main road, disappearing into the night. Sheriff Miller walked over to the door. "I will have a deputy patrol the perimeter for the next few nights, Ray," he said, "just in case he comes back." "He won't come back," I said quietly. "Not tonight. He has too much pride left. When that runs out, maybe, but not tonight." The sheriff nodded. He tipped his hat to Viola. "Good night, folks. I am sorry it had to end this way. It didn't end." "Sheriff," I said, looking at the empty driveway. "It just started." The sheriff left, closing the door behind him. The click of the latch was the loudest sound in the world. We were alone. The house was empty. The furniture was gone. The family was gone. I looked at Viola. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "We lost him, Ray," she whispered. "We lost our boy." I wrapped my arms around her. I pulled her close, feeling her trembling against me. "We did not lose him, Viola," I said, resting my chin on her head. "We set him free. He was drowning in that life. He was drowning in the easy money and the lies. We just kicked him to the surface." "But will he swim?" she asked. "I don't know." I admitted, "I honestly don't know. But he is a bishop, and bishops do not sink." I looked around the ballroom. The stage lights were still on, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "This house feels so big," I said. "It feels empty," Viola said. "We will fill it," I said. "With what?" she asked. "With the truth," I said. "And with children." I took her hand. "Come on," I said. "Let's go downstairs. I think there is still a bottle of wine that Harold didn't find." We walked through the silent house. We walked past the ghosts of the party. We walked past the echoes of the betrayal. We went down to the basement, our bunker, our command center. I poured 2 glasses of cheap red wine. We sat on the pull-out sofa. "To the future," I said, raising my glass. "To the future," Viola whispered, clinking her glass against mine. We drank. Outside, the wind howled through the trees. It was a cold wind, but inside, we were warm. We had survived the fire, and from the ashes, we would build something new, something that no one could ever take away. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. 3 months have passed since the night the lights went out in the ballroom. 3 months since the sirens faded and the screaming stopped. I am sitting on the back porch of the house I built, watching the sun rise over the Georgia pines. The air is crisp and cool. The excavators are gone. The scars in the earth where they tried to dig that pool have been filled in. I replanted the grass myself. It is green again. It is whole again, just like us. Viola is sitting next to me in the rocking chair. She is knitting a blanket. She is humming a song I have not heard her sing in years. It is a gospel song about a storm passing over. She looks younger. The lines of worry that had etched themselves into her forehead are smoothing out. She is not afraid of the doorbell anymore. She is not afraid of her own phone. We are drinking tea from simple ceramic mugs. The expensive crystal is packed away in boxes in the attic. We do not need it. We do not need to impress anyone. Technically, we do not own this house anymore. The deed is held securely in the vault of the Jeremiah Bishop Charitable Trust. On the 1st of every month, I write a check for $2,000. It is the market rate for rent. I mail it to Elijah's office, and from there, the money goes to the St. Jude's Home for Children downtown. Some people might think it is strange for a man to pay rent to live in his own house, but every time I sign that check, I feel a sense of pride I cannot describe. That money is not going to a bank. It is not going to a greedy developer. It is buying school books. It is buying warm coats for orphans. It is turning the greed of my family into hope for someone else's family. Elijah came by yesterday with the final report on the legal fallout. He calls it the cleanup. I call it the reckoning. Harold Preston is currently residing in the county jail awaiting trial. The list of charges is longer than my arm. Bank fraud, wire fraud, environmental negligence, conspiracy. Mr. Sterling the banker testified against him to save his own skin. It turns out Harold had been running this shell game for a decade. He was not a tycoon. He was a gambler who used other people's money as chips. And when the chips ran out, the house collapsed. He will likely spend the rest of his life in a cell that is smaller than my guest bathroom. Courtney did not fare much better. Without her father's protection and without Marcus's credit, she was exposed. The bank seized her condo. They repossessed her car. She moved back to Connecticut last month. Elijah tells me she is living in a small apartment working as a receptionist at a dental office. She tried to sue us for emotional distress, but the judge threw the case out before it even reached the docket. The medical records I found in the safe made sure of that. And then there is Marcus. I put my mug down on the railing. I look out at the tree line. I drove by the industrial district last week. I did not tell Viola, I just wanted to see. I parked my truck across the street from the regional distribution center for a large shipping company. It is hard work. It is loud work. I watched the shift change at 6 a.m. Men were walking out tired and dirty, carrying their lunch pails. And there he was. He was wearing a neon safety vest and steel-toed boots. He looked thinner. The softness around his jawline was gone, replaced by the sharp angles of fatigue. He was not walking with that arrogant swagger he used to have. He was walking with the heavy, purposeful gait of a man who has spent 8 hours lifting boxes. He stopped at the gate to light a cigarette. He looked at his hands. They were not manicured anymore. They were rough. They were dirty. He looked up, and for a second I thought he saw me. I held my breath. I wanted to wave. I wanted to call out his name. But he just looked at the traffic, pulled his collar up against the wind, and walked toward the bus stop. He did not get in a luxury SUV. He got on the city bus, on the city. I watched the bus drive away, and I smiled. It was not a smile of malice. It was a smile of relief. He is doing it. He is actually doing it. He is surviving. He is not calling me for money. He is not begging his mother for a place to stay. He is waking up every morning, putting on his boots and earning his bread. It is the hardest thing I have ever had to watch. No father wants to see his son struggle. But I know that struggle is the only thing that can save him. He is in the forge now. The heat is burning away the impurities. It is burning away the entitlement. And if he stays in the fire long enough, he will come out as steel. Viola stops knitting. She reaches out and touches my hand. Her skin is warm. "Did you see him?" she asks softly. I look at her. Of course she knows. She always knows. "I saw him," I say. "How did he look?" she asks. Her voice is steady, but her eyes are wet. "He looked tired," I say. "He looked hungry." Viola nods slowly. She looks down at her knitting. "Good," she whispers. "That means he is awake." We sit in silence for a while, watching the world wake up. The birds are singing in the oak tree, the same oak tree that almost got cut down for a vanity project. It is still standing. Its roots are deep, just like us. "Do you think he will come back?" Viola asks. "One day," I say, "when he has paid his debt to himself, when he can look me in the eye not as a boy who wants something, but as a man who has something to offer." "And if that takes 10 years, she asks. "Then we will wait 10 years, I say. "We have time, Viola. We have this house, we have each other, and we have our dignity." She squeezes my hand. "You know, Ray," she says, "I was so afraid of the silence. When the party stopped, when everyone left, I thought the silence would be unbearable. I thought it would feel empty. And now I ask." She smiles, a beautiful, radiant smile. "Now it feels like music," she says. I lift my mug to my lips. The tea is cold, but it still tastes good. We have won a war, Viola and I. But we did not win it with violence. We won it with truth. We won it by drawing a line in the sand and refusing to cross it. We lost a lot of things in the process. We lost friends. We lost illusions. We lost the version of our family we thought we had. But what we found in the ashes is real. It is solid. It is built on bedrock. I look at the garden. Viola has planted new hydrangeas near the porch. They are blooming blue and purple. Life goes on. The seasons change. The land heals. I am Ray Bishop. I am 72 years old. I have built skyscrapers. I have built bridges. But the most important thing I ever built was this boundary. This wall of self-respect that saved my wife and saved my soul. I finish my tea. I stand up and stretch. "Come on, Viola," I say. "Let's go inside." I think it is time to make breakfast. She stands up and takes my arm. Scrambled eggs, she asks, smiling. Scrambled eggs, I agree. And this time, we eat at the table. We walk into the house. The door closes behind us with a solid, reassuring click. The sun is fully up now, shining bright and clear on the Bishop estate. It is a new day, and for the first time in a long time, the foundation is holding strong. A man's silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Throughout my life, I built bridges and skyscrapers, but the hardest foundation I ever had to lay was the boundary between love and self-respect. We often blind ourselves to the toxicity of our own children, hoping they will change. But true love isn't about enabling their greed, it is about teaching them accountability, even if the lesson breaks your heart. In the end, dignity isn't something given to you by your family. It is something you must be willing to fight for, even against them. Thank you for listening to my story. It was not an easy journey, but it was a necessary one. I hope it gives you the strength to stand up for yourself in your own life. If you enjoyed this story, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring more stories like this to you. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to make a tough decision to save your family? I read every single comment and I would love to hear from you. Until next time, stay strong and remember that your dignity is priceless. See you in the next video.